Imagine, for a moment, a world bathed in the soft pre-dawn light. This is central Mexico, but not the one you might know from history books filled with war and conquest. This is a time before, a quiet interlude. We're in the year 1426, standing in the heart of a sprawling, vibrant landscape. The Valley of Mexico, as the sun begins its slow ascent, its first rays kiss. The peaks of the colossal volcanoes that stand as silent guardians around the valley, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, their snow-capped summits, glowing pink and gold, watch over the world awakening below. Their presence is immense, a constant reminder of nature's power and beauty. Down in the valley basin, a vast network of 5 interconnected lakes shimmers like a string of turquoise jewels. Lake Texcoco, the largest of them all, is a briny mirror reflecting the nascent sky. Its surface is still, disturbed only by the gentle paddling of an early morning fisherman in his canoe, his silhouette a dark shape against the brightening water. The air is cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. From the shores of these lakes, life unfurls. This is a land of incredible ingenuity. Look closer at the water's edge, and you'll see them. These are the famous floating gardens, man-made islands of rich mud and reeds, woven together to create some of the most fertile farmland on Earth. On these rectangular plots, a tapestry of green is already visible. Young maize shoots, the lifeblood of this civilization, stand in neat rows, their leaves glistening with morning dew. Beside them grow beans, squash, chilies, and tomatoes, a testament to a deep understanding of agriculture and a harmonious relationship with the land. The canals between the chinampas serve as highways, allowing for easy transport of goods and people. All across the valley floor, the smoke from countless hearths begins to rise, spiraling lazily into the morning air. These are the signs of the Altpedal, the city-states that dot the landscape. Each is a world unto itself, with its own ruler, its own market, its own patron gods. From the powerful lakeside metropolis of Texcoco, renowned for its poets and engineers, to the bustling market city of Tlacopan on the western shore, each community has its own distinct identity and pride. In the center of the Great Lake, on a small island, lies another city, one that is still growing in influence. Tenochtitlan. Its pyramids are not yet the towering structures they will become, but they already reach for the sky, their stone faces catching the first direct sunlight. The sounds of the city are just beginning to stir the distant call of a conch-shell trumpet, the rhythmic slap of women grinding maize on stone metates, the chatter of merchants preparing their wares for the day's market. These city-states are not always in perfect harmony. They are rivals, competitors for resources, for trade routes, for prestige. Alliances are made and broken. Skirmishes erupt along borders. Tribute is demanded and paid. Yet, for the most part, a delicate balance is maintained. They are connected by a shared culture, a common language, and an intricate web of trade and marriage ties. A merchant from Calco might sell his pottery in the market of Azcapotzalco, while a noblewoman from Calhuecan might marry a prince from Tix. Life, for the average person, is dictated by the timeless cycles of planting and harvesting, of ritual and celebration. Picture a farmer tending to his maize field, his bare feet sinking into the cool, damp earth. He looks up at the rising sun, offering a silent prayer for a good harvest. In a nearby village, a weaver sits before her loom, her skilled fingers flying as she transforms spun cotton into a vibrant textile. The patterns telling stories of gods and ancestors. Children laugh and chased each other through the narrow streets, their games echoing between the adobe walls of their homes. This is a world brimming with life, color, and complexity. It is a mosaic of different peoples, all living under the same sky, all watched over by the same volcanic peaks. The air is thick with the promise of the day, a sense of normalcy and routine. There's a rhythm to this life, a slow, steady pulse. But this peace, this delicate balance, is fragile. Beneath the surface of daily life, political tensions are simmering. The Tepanics of Azcapotzalco, the dominant power in the valley, are growing ever more ambitious under their ruthless ruler Tezesu. Their expansionist desires are a shadow stretching across the land. The Mexica of Tenochtitlan, once humble vassals, are gaining strength and confidence, their warrior spirit stirring. The seeds of a conflict that will reshape this entire world are being sown, quietly, in the courts of kings and the councils of warriors. The storm is coming. A war is on the horizon, a war unlike any this valley has seen before. It will be a war that forges an empire, one that will rise to unimaginable heights of power and splendor before its own dramatic fall. But for now, in this moment, there is only the quiet beauty of the dawn. The sun is higher now, its warmth spreading across the valley, illuminating the lakes, the fields, and the cities. The sounds of life grow louder. The pulse of the valley quickens. It is just another day in the Valley of Mexico, a day of peace, one of the last. Join us as we explore this incredible lost world, to witness the calm before the storm and the cataclysmic events that would forever change the course of history. Thanks for watching, and if you found this journey back in time fascinating, be sure to subscribe for the next chapter of our story. Today, we're diving into Chapter 2, the rise of the Aztec Empire. How did a group of nomadic people, the Mexica, build one of the most powerful empires in the Americas? Let's find out. Our story begins around the 12th century. The Mexica were a wandering tribe, outsiders, in the Valley of Mexico, a land already bustling with powerful cities. Legend tells us they were searching for a sign from their patron god, Huitzil. He told them to build their home where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. For nearly 200 years, they searched it, often serving as mercenaries for other cities, learning the art of war and politics along the way. Finally, around 1325, they found the prophesied sign on a swampy island in the middle of Lake T. It was a challenging location, marshy and undesirable to others. But for the Mexica, it was destiny. Here, they founded their magnificent capital, Tenochtitlan. What started as a humble settlement of reeds and mud would soon become one of the largest and most impressive cities in the world. Building a city on a lake was an engineering marvel. The Aztecs created chinampas, or floating gardens. These were artificial islands, built by weaving together reeds and piling mud and vegetation on top. This ingenious agricultural system was incredibly fertile, allowing them to produce multiple harvests a year and feed a rapidly growing population. They also built a sophisticated network of canals for transportation and massive causeways, or raised roads, connecting their island city to the mainland. For the first 100 years, Tenochtitlan was a junior partner to the dominant power in the region, the Teponecs of Aztec. The Mexica paid them tribute and fought in their wars, all while quietly building their strength. They learned from their powerful neighbors, adopting their political structures and military tactics. The turning point came in 1428. The Teponec ruler died, and a succession crisis created an opportunity. The Mexica, led by their visionary ruler, forged a crucial alliance with two other powerful city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan. This became known as the Triple Alliance. Together, they rebelled against the Teponecs. The war was fierce, but the alliance was victorious. They conquered Azcapotzalco, and with that, the balance of power in the Valley of Mexico shifted forever. The Triple Alliance wasn't an alliance of equals. While all three cities shared in the spoils of war, Tenochtitlan quickly became the dominant partner. Itzcoatl and his successors, like the great Montezuma I were not just warriors. They were brilliant statesmen. They began a systematic campaign of conquest, expanding their influence far beyond the Valley of Mexico. So, how was this vast empire structured? At the top was the Huey Tlatoani, the great speaker or emperor, who ruled from Tenochtitlan. He was seen as a semi-divine figure, acting as the high priest, commander-in-chief, and ultimate judge. Below him was a complex hierarchy of nobles, priests, and government officials who managed the day-to-day affairs of the empire. Society was highly stratified. The nobility, or pepetin, enjoyed great privileges, while the commoners, or subaltern, worked the land, served as soldiers, and paid taxes. There was also a class of merchants, known as the Puchteca, who traveled far and wide, trading goods and often acting as spies for the emperor. The lifeblood of the Aztec Empire was tribute. This wasn't just about money. Conquered city-states were required to pay regular tribute to the Triple Alliance. This tribute could be anything. Vast quantities of food like maize and beans, luxury goods like jade, turquoise, and brilliant feathers from tropical birds, warrior costumes, raw materials, and even sacrificial victims for their religious ceremonies. This system was the economic engine that fueled the empire's growth. It financed the construction of temples, palaces, and public works in Tenochtitlan and sustained the city's massive population. The tribute system ensured that the wealth of the entire region flowed into the capital. Tribute lists, recorded in intricate, show the staggering amount and variety of goods demanded from subject provinces. Of course, maintaining control over so many different peoples required immense military power. The Aztec army was formidable and highly organized. Every able-bodied man was expected to serve. Young boys were trained for war from an early age in schools called telpoch. An elite warrior's status was based on the number of captives he took in battle. These captives were crucial, not just as a show of strength, but for the religious practice of human sacrifice, which the Aztecs believed was necessary to appease the gods and keep the universe in balance. The Aztecs preferred to let conquered rulers stay in power, as long as they paid their tribute on time and acknowledged Aztec supremacy. This was a practical strategy. It was easier than trying to directly govern every single town. However, if a province rebelled, the Aztec response was swift and brutal. Their army would descend, crush the rebellion, and often impose even heavier tribute demands as punishment. This combination of fear and indirect rule allowed the Aztecs to control a vast and diverse territory with a relatively small administrative core. By the early 1500s, the Aztec Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, encompassing millions of people. Tenochtitlan had become a dazzling metropolis with a population of over 200,000, larger than any European city at the time. Its great temple, the Templo Mayor, soared into the sky, a testament to the empire's power and devotion to its gods. From humble migrants to masters of Mesoamerica, the rise of the Aztecs is a truly epic story of ambition, strategy, and power. But as we'll see in our next chapter, this mighty empire, at the very peak of its glory, was about to face a challenge it could never have imagined. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into Aztec history fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you next time as we explore the dramatic fall of the Aztec Empire. In the heart of Mesoamerica, surrounded on all sides by the mighty Aztec Empire, there existed a nation that refused to bend the knee. This is the story of Tlaxcala, the land that never surrendered, a testament to the power of unwavering resolve and fierce independence. Welcome back to our series on the Clash of Worlds in the 16th century. Today, we journey into the mountainous bastion of the Tlaxcalans, a people whose legacy is often misunderstood but is absolutely crucial to understanding the fall of the Aztecs. For nearly a century before the Spanish arrived, the Aztec Triple Alliance had been expanding its dominion, swallowing up city-states, and demanding tribute from conquered peoples. They were the undisputed superpower of the region, yet, right in their backyard, a mere 75 miles east of their grand capital, lay Tlaxcala, defiant thorn in the empire's side. So, how did this relatively small nation hold out for so long against such overwhelming odds? The answer lies in their unique political structure, their formidable military culture, and an unshakable commitment to their freedom. Unlike the centralized, monarchical system of the Aztecs, Tlaxcala wasn't a single kingdom ruled by one king. It was a confederation, a league of 4 allied city-states, or altpedal. Each of these city-states had its own ruler, or tlatoani, and its own internal government. However, when it came to matters of state, especially defense and foreign policy, they acted as one. Decisions weren't handed down from a single all-powerful emperor. Instead, they were made by a council composed of the leaders and nobles from all 4 partner states. This system, while sometimes leading to internal rivalries and debates, created a powerful sense of shared identity and collective responsibility. When an enemy threatened one part of Tlaxcala, they threatened all of Tlaxcala, and the entire confederation would rise to its defense. This decentralized yet unified structure made them incredibly resilient. You couldn't just conquer one capital and expect the whole nation to fall. You had to defeat them all, a task the Aztecs found impossible. The very existence of Tlaxcala was defined by conflict. Their primary struggle for survival was against the constant pressure of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs couldn't conquer them outright, so they resorted to a different strategy: a perpetual state of low-intensity warfare known as the Flower Wars, or Exayoyetl. In official Aztec histories, these were described as ritualistic battles, fought not for conquest, but to capture warriors for religious sacrifice. While there was certainly a religious component for the Tlaxcalans, the reality was much grimmer. The Flower Wars were a brutal form of economic and military siege. The Aztecs used these conflicts to bleed Tlaxcala dry, to weaken their military, and to terrorize their population. Furthermore, the Aztecs imposed a suffocating economic blockade. Tlaxcala was an island in a sea of Aztec-controlled territory. They were cut off from vital trade routes to the coastal lowlands. This meant they had no access to essential goods that were commonplace elsewhere in Mesoamerica. Things like cotton for clothing, cacao for a stimulating drink, and most critically, salt. Imagine living your entire life without salt, a crucial mineral for human health. The Tlaxcalans had to make do. They wore rough clothing made from maguey fibers and learned to live without many of the luxuries enjoyed by their enemies. This hardship didn't break them. It forged them. It instilled a deep-seated, generations-long hatred for the Aztec Empire, and a fierce pride in their own self. Every Tlaxcalan, from the highest noble to the humblest farmer, knew what they were fighting for. Their very survival and their way of life. This constant state of war shaped Tlaxcalan society from the ground up. It was a true warrior culture. From a young age, boys were trained in the arts of combat. Prowess on the battlefield was the ultimate path to social advancement. A commoner who captured many enemies in battle could rise to become a respected noble, gaining land and titles. Their armies were highly organized, divided into units based on their home city-state, and distinguished by vibrant banners and feathered standards. The Tlaxcalan warrior, armed with the macuehitilda, obsidian-bladed wooden sword and, protected by a shield and padded cotton armor, was a match for any soldier in Mesoamerica, including the famed jaguar and eagle warriors of the Aztecs. Their military wasn't just about individual skill. It was about strategy and numbers. The Confederation could mobilize a massive army on short notice. Estimates suggest that Tlaxcala could field tens of thousands of warriors, a force capable of meeting the Aztecs in open battle and often fighting them to a standstill. They knew their mountainous terrain intimately, using the narrow passes and high ridges to their advantage, ambushing and outmaneuvering larger Aztec forces. The decades of fighting the Flower Wars had turned their lands into a fortress and their people into seasoned veterans. They were not just surviving, they were actively resisting. They raided Aztec-controlled towns for supplies and captives, fighting fire with fire. So, when Hernan Cortes and a small band of conquistadors made their way inland from the coast in 1519, they weren't marching into a unified, monolithic empire. They were stepping into a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and ancient hatreds. As the Spaniards approached Tlaxcalan territory, their reputation preceded them. Messengers from the Aztec Emperor Montezuma had tried to warn the Tlaxcalans against these strange newcomers, painting them as monstrous invaders. But the Tlaxcalans were deeply suspicious of anything an Aztec emperor had to say. Their initial reaction to the Spanish was not to welcome them with open arms. It was to fight. Why would they trust these new foreigners any more than their old enemies? For several days, the Tlaxcalans threw their full military might against the Spanish invaders. The Tlaxcalan general, Xicotencatl the Younger, a brilliant and fiercely patriotic commander, led massive assaults against Cortes' column. Thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors swarmed the Spanish, testing their defenses, their horses, and their steel weapons. The fighting was intense and brutal. The Spanish were stunned by the scale and ferocity of the attacks. They were outnumbered 100-1 and pushed to the brink of annihilation. But something strange happened during these battles. The Spanish, despite being vastly outnumbered, did not break. Their steel armor and swords were superior to the Tlaxcalan weapons. Their cavalry, terrifying beasts, the likes of which had never been seen in Mesoamerica, could shatter infantry formations. And their cannons and crossbows could kill from a distance with terrifying efficiency. The Tlaxcalans, brave as they were, took heavy casualties. After several days of relentless fighting, a debate raged within the Tlaxcalan Council. Xicotencatl the Younger argued for continued resistance, believing the Spanish could be overwhelmed and destroyed. He was wary of their power and their motives. Others, however, led by the elder statesman Tenochtitlan. The elder, his father, saw a different possibility. They had fought the Spanish and seen their strength. They had also seen their implacable opposition to the Aztecs, their common enemy. Could these newcomers be the weapon they needed to finally break the Aztec yoke? The old saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," began to take root. The faction arguing for an alliance won the day. It was a pragmatic, strategic decision born from a century of hatred for the Aztec Empire. They decided to invite Cortes and his men into their capital, Tlaxcala, not as conquerors, but as potential allies. When the Spanish marched into the city, they were astounded. It was a large, vibrant metropolis rivaling many cities in Spain. But more importantly, they were greeted not with hostility, but with celebration. The Tlaxcalans offered them food, shelter, and thousands of their finest warriors to join their cause. This alliance was the single most important turning point in the Spanish campaign. Without the Tlaxcalans, Cortes' expedition would have been a failure. It would have been wiped out long before it ever reached the shores of Lake Texcoco. The Tlaxcalans provided the Spanish with a safe base of operations deep within enemy territory. They supplied the army with food and critical resources, and most importantly, they provided the manpower. The conquest of Mexico was not a victory of a few hundred Spaniards against millions. It was, in essence, a massive civil war. With the Tlaxcalans and other subject peoples rising up against their Aztec overlords, with the Spanish acting as a catalyst and providing a technological edge, the Tlaxcalan warriors fought alongside the Spanish in every major battle to come. They were instrumental in the siege of Tenochtitlan, their knowledge of the local terrain and their sheer numbers proving decisive. They paddled the canoes, built the causeways, and engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat in the streets of the Aztec capital. They were fighting for their own liberation, to settle a century-old score, and to secure their future. In the end, their gamble paid off. After the fall of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish crown recognized Tlaxcala's crucial role. While the rest of Mesoamerica was carved up into estates for the conquistadors, Tlaxcala was granted a special status. They were largely allowed to maintain their own government, were exempted from the usual tribute payments, and their nobles were given privileges similar to those of Spanish adoption. For centuries, they proudly maintained their unique identity within the new Spanish colonial world, a direct result of their fierce independence and their strategic alliance. The story of Tlaxcala is a powerful reminder that history is never simple. They were not traitors to their people, as some later nationalist narratives have tried to portray them. They were a proud and independent nation fighting for their own survival against a brutal, expansionist empire. Their decision to ally with Cortes was a calculated choice made by a politically savvy and battle-hardened people who saw an opportunity to defeat their greatest enemy. Tlaxcala, the land that refused to kneel to the Aztecs, ultimately secured its autonomy by making a deal with a new and even more powerful force that was about to change their world forever. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the incredible story of the Tlaxcala. Their history is a vital piece of the puzzle of this era. If you found this interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter, where we finally arrive at the gates of the magnificent Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. See you next time. Ever looked at a map and wondered how a tiny nation could defy a mighty empire? Today, we're diving into one of history's most fascinating geopolitical puzzles, the tiny Republic of Tlaxcala, a thorn in the side of the vast Aztec Empire. How did they survive, completely surrounded by their mortal enemies? The answer, as we'll see, is written in the very mountains, valleys, and trade routes of ancient Mexico. Welcome to Chapter 4, Geography as Destiny. To understand this incredible story of resistance, we need to picture the landscape of central Mexico. We're talking about a high-altitude world of volcanic peaks, steep-sided valleys, and fertile basins. This isn't just a backdrop, it's a key player in our story. The Aztec Empire, centered in the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, sat in the heart of the basin of Mexico. This basin was a strategic gold mine, a large, flat, and fertile area connected by a network of lakes, which made moving troops and goods incredibly efficient. From this central hub, the Aztecs projected their power outwards, conquering city-state after city-state. Their expansion followed a predictable pattern. They would first secure the fertile valleys, which could support large armies. and provide a steady stream of tribute in the form of food. Then, they would seize control of the major trade routes that snaked through the mountain pass. These routes were the arteries of the Mesoamerican world, carrying precious goods like cacao, cotton, obsidian, and brilliant feathers. Control the routes, and you control the economy. By choking off a rival's access to these goods, the Aztecs could weaken them before a single arrow was fired. It was a brilliant strategy of economic and military strangulation, and it worked almost every time. But then, there was Tlaxcala. If you look at a map of the Aztec Empire at its height in the early 1500s, it's a sea of imperial control. But right in the middle, a little to the east of Tenochtitlan, you'll see an island of independence, the land of the Tlaxcala. So, what made Tlaxcala different? It all comes down to their unique geographical position. Tlaxcala was nestled high up in a series of interconnected mountain valleys, a natural fortress carved by nature itself. Unlike the open basin of Mexico, the Tlaxcalan homeland was a labyrinth of difficult terrain. To invade Tlaxcala, Aztec armies couldn't just march across a flat plain. They had to funnel their forces through narrow, easily defensible mountain paths. The Tlaxcalans knew these passes like the back of their hands. They could set up ambushes, use the high ground to their advantage, and stage tactical retreats that would lure Aztec forces deeper into hostile territory, stretching their supply lines thin. Think of it like the famous Battle of Thermopylae, where a small number of Spartans used a narrow pass to hold off a massive Persian army. The Tlaxcalans employed a similar strategy, but on a much larger, more sustained scale. Their mountains were their greatest allies. The steep slopes tired out the invading soldiers, the high altitude left them breathless, and the winding valleys made large-scale military formations nearly impossible to maintain. Furthermore, the Tlaxcalan territory was bordered on one side by a massive, 9-kilometer-long wall. This wasn't just a simple barrier. It was a testament to their determination to remain free. Built of stone and adobe, it was a formidable defensive structure that channeled any potential invasion force into specific, heavily guarded gateways. This great wall served as a clear line in the sand, a physical manifestation of Tlaxcalan sovereignty. But geography wasn't just about defense. It was also about self-sufficiency. The valleys of Tlaxcala were incredibly fertile. They were able to grow enough maize, beans, and squash to feed their population, even when completely cut off from the outside world. While the Aztecs' economic blockade was a powerful weapon against other cities, it was less effective against Tlaxcala. The Tlaxcalans were denied luxuries like salt, cotton, and cacao, a major hardship, to be sure, but they had the fundamental resources to survive. They learned to live without, and this hardship forged a fierce, independent, and deeply anti-Aztec identity. This geographical isolation and defensive advantage created a unique political and military culture. Tlaxcala wasn't a monarchy ruled by a single king like the Aztecs. It was a confederation of 4 allied city-states, ruled by a council of leaders. This decentralized structure made them incredibly resilient. Even if the Aztecs managed to conquer one of the 4 city centers, the other 3 could continue the fight. There was no single head of the snake to cut off. The constant threat from the surrounding Aztec Empire also meant that Tlaxcalan society was highly militarized. Every able-bodied man was a warrior, trained from a young age to defend his homeland. Their entire existence was a state of perpetual warfare. The Aztecs referred to these ongoing ritualized conflicts as flower wars. From the Aztec perspective, these were a way to capture warriors for religious sacrifice and to keep their own armies battle-hardened. However, for the Tlaxcalans, these weren't just ritual games. They were a matter of life and death, a constant struggle for survival, and it made them some of the most skilled and ferocious warriors in all of Mesoamerica. While the Aztecs saw the flower wars as a form of imperial training exercise, the Tlaxcalans saw them as a chance to hone their skills and bleed the empire, one soldier at a time. This constant state of conflict, fueled by their geographic isolation, meant that when the Spanish arrived in 1519, the Aztecs weren't facing a weak, isolated city-state. They were facing a battle-hardened nation with a deep, multi-generational hatred for their empire. Hernan Cortes and his small band of conquistadors didn't conquer the Aztec Empire alone. They couldn't have. Their most crucial allies were the Tlaxcalans. When the Spanish first entered Tlaxcalan territory, They were met with fierce resistance, but after a series of brutal battles, the Tlaxcalan leaders saw an opportunity. They recognized in these strange foreigners a powerful weapon they could use to finally break the Aztec strength. The geography that had isolated Tlaxcala for so long now became a strategic asset for the Spanish. Tlaxcala served as a safe haven, a base of operations deep within enemy territory. When Cortés was driven out of Tenochtitlan during the famous Noche Triste, Night of Sorrows, where did he retreat to regroup and nurse his wounded army back to health? He went to Tlaxcala. It was their mountain fortress that allowed the Spanish conquest to continue. The Tlaxcalans provided thousands upon thousands of elite warriors, food, and crucial logistical support for the final siege of Tenochtitlan. So, the story of Tlaxcala is a powerful lesson in how geography shapes history. Their mountains provided a natural fortress. Their fertile valleys granted them self-sufficiency. The constant pressure from the Aztec Empire forged a resilient and militaristic culture, and their strategic position made them the indispensable allies of the Spanish conquistadors. Without its unique geography, Tlaxcala would have likely been just another conquered province, another name on the long list of Aztec tribute. Instead, it became the crucible of resistance, the unconquered island in a sea of empire, and ultimately, the key that unlocked the fall of the Aztecs. It proves that sometimes the destiny of an empire isn't decided on the battlefield alone, but in the very land the battle is fought upon. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Mesoamerican history. If you found this fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the past. Let me know in the comments what other historical puzzles you'd like to see us explore. See you next time. Welcome back, history buffs, to our deep dive into the incredible story of the Tlaxcala. In our last chapter, we saw how Tlaxcala rose from a small settlement to a powerful, independent confederacy, a beacon of defiance, right in the heart of the Aztec Empire's sphere of influence. But as Tlaxcala grew stronger, a collision with the mighty Aztecs became inevitable. Today, in Chapter 5, we explore the first sparks of that conflict, a long and complex rivalry that would shape the future of Mesoamerica. Now, when you think of war, you might imagine all-out, brutal campaigns of total destruction. But the early conflicts between the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans were something else entirely. These weren't wars of annihilation. They were highly ritualized encounters, steeped in tradition and a unique understanding of honor. These were the famous Flower Wars, or Exioyatl, in the Nahuatl language. So, what exactly was a flower war? Imagine two heavyweight boxers stepping into a ring. They're there to fight, to prove their strength and skill. But there are rules. The goal isn't necessarily to kill the opponent, but to outperform them, to capture them. For the Aztecs and Tlaxcalans, the battlefield was their ring. The primary objective was not to conquer territory or wipe out the enemy army, but to capture warriors for ritual sacrifice. This was a central part of their worldview. They believed that the gods, particularly the sun god, Huitzil, required human hearts and blood to keep the sun rising and the universe in balance. Capturing a worthy opponent in battle was one of the highest honors a warrior could achieve. It was a testament to his strength, courage, and devotion. These flower wars were prearranged. Leaders from both sides would agree on a time and a specific sacred location, a designated battlefield known as a coup. It was a formal affair. Warriors would arrive dressed in their most spectacular battle regalia, brilliant feather headdresses, jaguar pelts, and brightly painted shields. It was a display of power and prestige, a psychological spectacle before the first blow was even struck. The air would be filled with the sounds of conch shell trumpets, drums, and intimidating war cries. It was a symphony of impending conflict, designed to both inspire one's own side and unnerve the enemy. The fighting itself was highly individualistic. While armies moved as units, combat often broke down into a series of one-on-one duels. A Tlaxcalan warrior, armed with his Makua wooden club edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades, would face off against an Aztec jaguar or eagle warrior. Their movements would be like a deadly dance, a test of agility, strategy, and pure fighting prowess. The goal was to disable, not necessarily to kill. A warrior might try to cut the tendons in his opponent's legs, or strike them in a way that would knock them unconscious, making them easier to capture. Killing an enemy on the battlefield was almost seen as a failure, a lack of skill. The real prize was bringing a live, breathing captive back to your city-state. This emphasis on capture had a profound effect on military tactics and technology. Weapons were designed to maim and incapacitate. Armor, made from tightly woven cotton soaked in salt water to make it stiff, was meant to protect against blows and blade cuts, not necessarily to stop a fatal piercing wound. Everything was geared towards this ritual of capture. Success in a flower war brought immense prestige. A warrior who captured multiple enemies could rise through the social ranks, earning land, titles, and a respected place in society. For the Tlaxcalans, this system forged some of the most formidable warriors in Mesoamerica. They were constantly tested, their skills honed in these regular, ritualized battles. Owever. Do you until let the word flower or the concept of ritual fool you into thinking these were unserious or deadly? They were. People died. Warriors were wounded. But the underlying philosophy was different from the total war concepts we're more familiar with. There was a sense of mutual respect, an acknowledgement that the warriors on the other side were also fulfilling their sacred duty. They were worthy opponents, and capturing one was an honor precisely because they were so skilled. Over time, though, the nature of this conflict began to change. As the Aztec Empire expanded, its requests for Tlaxcala to submit became more like demands. The Flower Wars, which had started as a form of ritual combat, slowly started to feel more like a relentless siege. The Aztecs began to use their immense numerical and logistical advantage to put a strategic stranglehold on Tlaxcala. They established a network of fortresses and garrisons around Tlaxcalan territory, effectively blockading them. This economic warfare was devastating. The Tlaxcalans were cut off from vital trade routes. They couldn't get access to certain luxury goods, like cotton, cacao, or precious feathers, which were important for their nobility. More critically, they were cut off from salt. This might not sound like a big deal to us, but in the ancient world, salt was essential for preserving food and for a healthy diet. The Aztecs controlled the major salt-producing regions, and they weaponized this control. For decades, the people of Tlaxcala had to live without it, a constant, daily reminder of their encirclement and the hostility of their powerful neighbor. This blockade wasn't just an economic strategy, it was a psychological one. It was meant to grind down the Tlaxcalan spirit, to make them feel isolated and to force them into submission. This growing pressure changed the Tlaxcalan perspective. The Flower Wars started to lose their purely ritualistic character and became a matter of survival. The constant threat from the Aztecs fostered a deep-seated, simmering resentment. A warrior spirit that was once focused on honor and ritual now became a fierce, unyielding desire for independence. They weren't just fighting for captives anymore. They were fighting for their very existence, for their right to be free. The Aztec blockade didn't break them. It forged them. It turned Tlaxcala into a hardened, militarized state, united by a common enemy. Every Tlaxcalan, from the highest noble to the common farmer, shared a profound animosity towards the Aztec Empire. This decades-long struggle, this crucible of conflict, created a people who were fiercely independent and militarily skilled. The Aztecs, in their attempt to subdue Tlaxcala, had inadvertently created their most dangerous and determined foe. The stage was now set for a dramatic shift. The animosity was no longer just a ritual rivalry. It was a deep-seated hatred waiting for a chance to erupt. And that chance was just over the horizon, arriving on strange ships from across the eastern sea. The clash between Aztec and Tlaxcalan was about to enter a new, world-altering phase. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The story is just getting more intense from here. If you're enjoying this journey into the past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll see you in the next chapter. Welcome back to World History. Last time, we explored the rise of the Aztec Empire, a civilization that dominated Mesoamerica through military might and political savvy. But right in the heart of their vast domain, a defiant city-state remained unconquered, Tlaxcala. This raises a fascinating question. Why? Why would the mighty Aztecs, an empire built on conquest, allow a persistent, hostile enemy to exist right on their doorstep? Was it a sign of weakness? A military oversight? Or was it something far more strategic and, dare I say, sinister? The answer reveals a unique and chilling aspect of Aztec warfare, a concept we call war without conquest. It challenges everything we think we know about ancient empires and their motivations for battle. So today, we're diving deep into the strange relationship between the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans to uncover one of history's most intriguing strategic puzzles. To understand this, we first need to appreciate the sheer power of the Aztec Triple Alliance. By the late 15th century, Tenochtitlan and its allies had subjugated hundreds of city-states across central Mexico. Their armies were massive, well-organized, and battle-hardened. They had the numbers, the logistics, and the imperial will to crush virtually any opponent. And yet, Tlaxcala, a confederation of 4 city-states nestled in a high mountain valley, held out. They weren't just a minor nuisance. They were a constant, bleeding thorn in the empire's side. The Aztecs surrounded them, imposing a punishing economic blockade. This embargo cut off vital trade goods like salt, cotton, and precious cacao beans. Life in Tlaxcala was hard, deprived of the luxuries and even some necessities that flowed through the rest of the empire. So again, why not just march in and finish the job? The Aztecs certainly tried. They launched numerous large-scale campaigns against the Tlaxcalans. But these assaults were always repelled. The Tlaxcalans were ferocious warriors, fighting with the desperation of a people defending their homeland. Their mountainous territory also provided a significant defensive advantage, making a full-scale invasion costly and difficult. But was that the whole story? Was it purely a matter of military stalemate? Many historians now believe the answer is no. The Aztecs could have, if they had truly committed all their resources, eventually overwhelmed Tlaxcala. The fact that they didn't suggests they chose not to. Tlaxcala was, in a way, more valuable to the Aztecs alive than it was conquered. This brings us to the core of our topic, the Flower Wars, These weren't wars of conquest aimed at seizing territory or resources. Instead, they were ritualistic, prearranged battles fought between the Aztecs and their designated enemies, most notably the Tlaxcala. The term Flower War is poetic, but the reality was anything but. The primary objective of these conflicts was not to kill the enemy on the battlefield, but to capture them alive. Why? For 2 main reasons that were central to the Aztec worldview: religious sacrifice and military training. Let's break down the religious aspect first. The Aztec cosmos was a fragile, terrifying place. They believed their gods, particularly the sun god, required a constant supply of human hearts and blood to keep the sun rising each day and prevent the universe from plunging into darkness. This divine thirst needed to be quenched. Conquered subjects could be sacrificed, but there was a special prestige in offering up a valiant, worthy warrior captured in battle. Tlaxcalan warriors, renowned for their skill and courage, were considered the highest quality of sacrifice. The Flower Wars provided a steady, reliable stream of these Hivalio captives to be offered up on the Great Pyramids of Tenochtitlan. It was a state-sponsored, ritualized system for harvesting human lives to maintain cosmic order. The second purpose was military training. An army, no matter how large, needs to stay sharp. Long periods of peace can lead to complacency and a decline in combat effectiveness. The Flower Wars served as a live-fire training ground for the Aztec military elite, especially the prestigious Jaguar and Eagle warrior societies. It was a place for young nobles to prove their valor, gain experience, and climb the social ladder. Capturing an enemy in battle was the primary way for a warrior to achieve rank and recognition. The more captives a warrior took, the more esteemed he became. These ritual battles allowed the Aztec war machine to remain perpetually honed, ensuring that its best fighters were always battle-ready for real campaigns of conquest elsewhere, or for putting down rebellions within the empire. Tlaxcala, as the eternal enemy, became the perfect sparring partner. They were close, they were strong, and they were always willing to fight for their survival. The Aztecs didn't want to destroy them because doing so would mean destroying their best training facility and their prime source of sacrificial victims. So, Tlaxcala became what we might call a strategic enemy. They were a state kept intentionally independent and hostile for the benefit of the empire. This arrangement, however, was a double-edged sword for the Aztecs. While it served their religious and military needs, it also cultivated a deep, simmering, and undying hatred among the For generations, the people of Tlaxcala endured the Aztec blockade, and saw their finest warriors dragged away to be sacrificed. In Tenochtitlan, they didn't see these battles as honorable rituals. They saw them as a brutal struggle for survival against a tyrannical empire that wanted to bleed them dry. Their hatred for the Aztecs was absolute. They were not just rivals, they were mortal enemies. This created a permanent pocket of instability and intense animosity right in the center of the Aztec world. The Aztecs, in their strategic calculus, seemed to have overlooked the long-term danger of nurturing such a powerful and motivated foe. They were playing a dangerous game, maintaining a perpetual state of low-level warfare that prevented any possibility of peace or assimilation. This policy created a wound that never healed, and it would ultimately come back to haunt them in the most devastating way imaginable. And then, everything changed. In 1519, a small fleet of ships arrived on the coast, carrying strange, pale-skinned men with metal armor, horses, and firearms. The Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernan Cortes, had arrived. Cortes quickly learned about the political landscape of Mesoamerica and, most importantly, about the deep-seated hatred the Tlaxcalans held for the Aztecs. When the Spanish first entered Tlaxcalan territory, they were met with fierce resistance. The Tlaxcalans fought the conquistadors with the same tenacity they showed the Aztecs. But after a series of brutal battles, the Tlaxcalan leaders saw a unique opportunity. These newcomers, with their powerful weapons and apparent opposition to the Aztecs, could be the key to their salvation. They saw in Cortes not a new conqueror, but a powerful ally in their generations-long struggle against Tenochtitlan. After negotiations, they made a fateful decision. They would ally with the Spanish. This alliance was the single most important factor in the downfall of the Aztec Empire. The handful of Spanish soldiers would have been no match for the massive Aztec armies on their own. But, with the Tlaxcalans, they gained tens of thousands of elite, battle-hardened warriors who knew the terrain, knew Aztec tactics, and were driven by a burning desire for revenge. The Tlaxcalans provided the Spanish with a safe haven to regroup after their initial expulsion from Tenochtitlan. They provided the bulk of the manpower for the final siege of the city. They built the boats that allowed the Spanish to control the lake surrounding the Aztec capital. Tlaxcalan warriors fought and died alongside the conquistadors. In every major battle, in essence, the Aztecs' long-term strategy of maintaining Tlaxcala as a strategic enemy had backfired spectacularly. The very enemy they had cultivated for ritual and training became the instrument of their own destruction. The war without conquest had created a foe so full of hate that they were willing to ally with outsiders to bring down the entire imperial system. The fall of Tenochtitlan, in 1521, was not simply a Spanish conquest. It was a Mesoamerican civil war, with the Tlaxcalans leading the charge. The Aztecs, blinded by their own ritual needs and imperial arrogance, had failed to see the danger until it was far too late. The story of Tlaxcala is a powerful lesson in unintended consequences, showing how a seemingly clever strategy can create the very conditions for one's own downfall. The undying enemy the Aztecs had so carefully preserved became the tipping point that brought their world crashing down. Thanks for watching. It's a complex and tragic story that really changes how we see the Spanish conquest. If you found this interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Aztecs' flower war strategy. See you next time. When you think of war, what comes to mind? Huge armies clashing, sieges and destruction, conquest and annihilation. For many ancient cultures, that's a pretty accurate picture. But what if I told you that for the civilizations of Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztecs, the Zapotecs war was something entirely different? It wasn't just about destroying your enemy. It was a deeply ingrained part of their society, a sacred ceremony, a social obligation, and a cosmic duty. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating and complex meaning of war in ancient Mesoamerica. Forget what you've seen in movies. The primary goal of Mesoamerican warfare, especially for cultures like the Aztecs, wasn't to wipe out cities or kill every soldier on the battlefield. The main prize was captives. Taking prisoners alive was the mark of a truly great warrior. Why? Because these captives played a vital role in religious rituals. To the Mesoamericans, the universe was a delicate balance of cosmic forces. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humans had a sacred duty to repay that debt with the most precious substance of all: human life. Sacrificial rituals, often involving captives of war, were seen as essential to nourishing the gods, ensuring the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and the universe would continue to function. So, a warrior heading into battle wasn't just a soldier. He was a provider for the gods, fulfilling a sacred responsibility. This made capturing an enemy, rather than killing them, the ultimate act of skill and piety. This focus on capturing enemies fundamentally shaped how battles were fought. While there were certainly deadly weapons, obsidian-bladed swords, called makuit, spears, and odlatos or spear throwers, that could launch darts with incredible force, there was also a strong emphasis on individual combat. Warriors sought to prove their valor by facing an enemy one-on-one and subduing them. Imagine the chaos of a European battlefield with massive formations and artillery. Now, picture a more fluid scene. A series of duels where individual prowess was on full display. A warrior's prestige, his social standing, and his path to advancement all depended on the number of captives he could take. An Aztec warrior who captured his first prisoner earned the right to wear his hair in a specific topknot. With more captives, he could wear more elaborate costumes, feathered shields, and insignia that publicly declared his bravery and success. He could rise through the ranks, gain land, and become a respected member of the elite. War was the primary engine of social mobility. A commoner with enough courage and skill on the battlefield could become a noble. This brings us to the ceremonial aspect of war. Some conflicts, known as flowery wars, or exayotl in the Aztec language, were particularly fascinating. These were prearranged ritualized battles between specific city-states, like the Aztec Triple Alliance and their rivals in the stated purpose of these wars wasn't conquest or territory. Instead, it was a way for both sides to obtain high-status captives for sacrifice and to provide a live-fire training ground for their warriors. It was like a brutal, high-stakes tournament. The rules were understood by both sides. They would meet at a designated place and time to engage in combat. It was a chance for young warriors to prove themselves and for seasoned veterans to maintain their skills. While people definitely died in flowery wars, their ceremonial nature highlights how different their concept of conflict was. It wasn't total war. It was a necessary, recurring event woven into the fabric of their political and religious lives. It maintained a state of controlled hostility that served the needs of the state and the gods. Of course, this doesn't mean Mesoamerican warfare was never about conquest. It absolutely was. The Aztec Empire, for example, expanded through military campaigns that forced other city-states to pay tribute. If a city resisted or later rebelled, the consequences could be severe. The Aztecs might subjugate them, install a loyal ruler, and demand heavy payments of goods like food, textiles, feathers, and precious metals. This tribute system was the economic lifeblood of the empire, feeding the capital of Tenochtitlan and funding further military expeditions. So, we see a dual nature to their warfare. On one hand, you have the sacred, ritualized capture of individuals. On the other, you have strategic campaigns for economic and political control. The two were not mutually exclusive. They were two sides of the same coin. A war of conquest would still involve capturing warriors for sacrifice, and the prestige gained from those captures would fuel the ambitions of the empire. Let's look at the Maya for a moment. For a long time, scholars thought the classic Maya were a peaceful, stargazing people, but the decipherment of their writing system revealed a very different story. Maya city-states like Tikal, Calakmul, and Palenque were locked in centuries of intense rivalry. Their wars were often deeply personal, fought between royal dynasties. Kings were expected to be warrior leaders, and inscriptions and art frequently depict them capturing rival lords. A successful war could result in a king from a defeated city being taken captive and sacrificed by the victorious ruler. This was a massive political statement. It demonstrated the victor's power and divine favor, while utterly humiliating the loser's dynasty and their patron gods. The goal wasn't always to absorb the defeated city's territory, but to assert dominance and weaken a rival. These wars were often about capturing symbolic power as much as physical land. The entire worldview of these societies was shaped by this unique approach to conflict. War was not an unfortunate breakdown of diplomacy. It was a fundamental part of the cosmic order. It was a social mechanism that allowed individuals to achieve greatness. It was a religious duty that kept the universe in balance, and it was a political tool for building and maintaining empires. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they encountered a military philosophy that was completely alien to them. The Spanish fought a war of annihilation. Their goal was to kill the enemy, break their lines, and conquer their land as efficiently as possible. The Aztecs, initially, fought to capture, not to kill. This clash of military doctrines was a major factor in the Spanish conquest. The Mesoamericans were fighting a ritual, and the Spanish were fighting for keeps. It's a powerful reminder that there isn't one single, universal way to understand conflict. The Mesoamerican meaning of war shows us a world where battle was a sacred performance, a path to social honor, and a duty to the gods. It was a brutal, violent, yet deeply meaningful part of life, fundamentally different from the concept of total war that we are so familiar with today. By understanding their perspective, we gain a much richer and more nuanced view of these incredible civilizations. What do you find most surprising about Mesoamerican warfare? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the past, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more explorations of history. See you next time. Have you ever heard of a war where the goal wasn't to conquer territory or kill the enemy, but something else entirely? Welcome to the fascinating and often misunderstood world of the Aztec Flower Wars. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most unique forms of conflict in human history. To understand why these wars began, we need to travel back to the heart of the Aztec Empire in the mid-15th century. Picture this: the Aztec Triple Alliance, a powerful coalition of the city-states of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlaxcalan, dominated central Mexico. They were at the height of their power, having subjugated many of their neighbors. But this period of dominance was interrupted by a series of devastating natural disasters between 1450 and 1454. The region was hit by a severe drought, followed by early frosts and widespread famine. Crops failed, and the people were starving. The Aztec leaders and priests looked for an explanation, a reason why the gods seemed so angry. Their conclusion was that the gods, particularly the sun god Huitzilopochtli, were displeased. Huitzilopochtli was a central figure in their cosmology. They believed he was in a constant battle against darkness, and to keep the sun rising every day, he needed to be nourished. His food, chalcahuitl, or precious water, which was human blood and hearts. During times of peace and prosperity, the regular sacrifices were enough. But in the face of this great famine, the priests believed a more significant offering was required to appease the gods and restore balance to the cosmos. This theological crisis led to a radical idea. According to some historical accounts, the leaders of the Triple Alliance met with the rulers of the neighboring Tlaxcala Pueblan Valley, like Tlaxcala, Huachotzingo, and Cholula. These states were traditional rivals of the Aztecs, but had not been fully conquered. At this meeting, they allegedly came to a formal agreement to stage a new kind of warfare. These would not be wars of conquest. No territory would be taken, no cities would be razed. Instead, these would be ceremonial, prearranged battles fought at specific times and in designated sacred places, known as flower fields. The primary objective was to capture enemy warriors alive. These captives would then be taken back to their respective cities and offered as sacrifices to the gods. These practices, would ensure the gods were well fed. The cosmic order would be maintained, and disasters like the famine would be averted. They called this Ixayoyotl the Flower War, because the captured warriors, destined for sacrifice, were seen as precious flowers blooming on the battlefield, ready to be picked for the gods. So, how did a flower war actually work? It was a highly ritualized affair. The opposing sides would agree on the time and place for the battle. These locations were often plains situated between the territories of the combatants. The warriors who participated were elite members of the Aztec and Tlaxcalan nobility and warrior classes. They would dress in their most spectacular battle regalia, brightly colored feather head dresses, jaguar pelts, and ornate shields. This wasn't just for show, it was a display of their status and martial prowess. The goal was to demonstrate individual skill and bravery. Instead of using their deadliest weapons to kill, the warriors would try to subdue and capture their opponents. Of course, deaths still occurred. These were real battles with sharp obsidian-bladed weapons called but the emphasis was on taking captives. A warrior's prestige was measured not by how many enemies he killed, but by how many he brought back alive for sacrifice. Capturing a warrior was a far more skillful and honorable act than simply killing him. It was a testament to one's strength and ability. Once captured, the prisoners were treated with a degree of respect. They were seen as messengers to the gods. They would be well fed, adorned in fine clothes, and participated in rituals before their eventual sacrifice. For the Aztecs, being sacrificed was a great honor, ensuring a glorious afterlife for the warrior. Now, while this religious explanation is the most well-known, modern historians believe there might have been other, more practical reasons for the Flower Wars. One major theory is that they served as a form of military training. In a region where the Aztec army had few major rivals left, these ritual battles kept their elite warriors in peak fighting condition. It was a way to test new tactics, train young warriors, and maintain a constant state of military readiness without the full cost of a total war of conquest. Think of it as a large-scale, live-fire military exercise. This also allowed the Aztec military to assess the strength and tactics of their rivals, like the famously resilient Tlaxcalans, who would later become crucial allies to the Spanish. Another political motivation could have been intimidation. By repeatedly engaging in these wars and capturing warriors from rival states, the Aztecs sent a clear message of their military superiority. It was a form of low-intensity, ongoing warfare that slowly wore down their opponents' morale and drained them of their best warriors, all without the logistical strain of a full-scale invasion. It kept their enemies weak and off balance, reinforcing the Aztec position at the top of the regional power structure. So, were the Flower Wars purely for religion, or were they a clever mix of military training and political maneuvering? The truth is likely a combination of all these factors. For the Aztecs, religion, politics, and warfare were not separate spheres. They were deeply intertwined. The need to appease the gods provided the justification for a practice that also had very real military and political benefits. It allowed them to maintain cosmic balance while simultaneously sharpening their claws and asserting their dominance. The Flower Wars continued right up until the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century. In fact, this long-standing tradition of conflict between the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans had a profound impact on the Spanish conquest, because the Tlaxcalans had spent decades fighting the Aztecs in these ritual wars. They had developed a fierce hatred for them, but also a deep understanding of their military tactics. They had never been fully conquered and harbored a strong desire for revenge. When Hernan Cortes and his conquistadors arrived, the Tlaxcalans saw an opportunity. They formed a powerful alliance with the Spanish, providing them with tens of thousands of warriors, critical supplies, and invaluable intelligence about the Aztec Empire. This alliance was arguably the single most important factor in the downfall of Tenochtitlan. The Flower Wars, which were designed to sustain the Aztec world, ironically, played a key role in its ultimate destruction. So, the next time you think of warfare, remember it is a powerful reminder that the motivations for conflict are as diverse and complex as human culture itself. It was a system born from a belief that blood nourished the sun, a practice that doubled as an elite training ground, and a political tool that ultimately backfired, paving the way for the end of the Aztec Empire. A war of flowers, fought for gods and glory, that left an indelible mark on the history of the Americas. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the incredible stories from our past. Let me know in the comments what you think were the Flower Wars, more about religion or politics. See you in the next video. Today, we re-delving into a complex and often misunderstood aspect of ancient Mesoamerican societies: the fate of captured warriors. It's a topic that can feel distant and harsh, but by exploring the beliefs that guided these actions, we can gain a more nuanced understanding of their world. So, what really happened to a warrior taken captive in battle? The answer is far more intricate than you might imagine. Contrary to popular belief, a captured warrior wasn't immediately dispatched. Instead, his capture marked the beginning of a long, elaborate, and surprisingly honored journey. This individual was seen not as a mere prisoner of war, but as a sacred vessel, a chosen representative destined to play a crucial role in the cosmic order. The captor, in turn, gained immense prestige, but also a profound responsibility. He was now the guardian of this sacred captive, treating him not with contempt, but with a form of reverence. 4 months, sometimes even over a year, the captive would live in the home of his captor. He was given fine clothes, often the same attire worn by his guardian. He was well fed, receiving the best food the household could offer. He participated in community life, attended festivals, and was treated as an honored guest. This period wasn't about punishment. It was a process of spiritual preparation. The captive was being transformed, purified, and elevated from a defeated enemy into a divine messenger, someone who would soon travel to the realm of the gods. This time also served a social purpose. The captive would tell stories of his homeland, sing its songs, and share its history. It was a way for the community to learn about its rivals, not just as enemies, but as people with their own rich culture. Children would listen, and the captive often formed bonds with the family, especially with his captor, whom he might address as father, while the captor referred to him as son. It was a relationship filled with paradoxes, respect and affection intertwined with a predetermined, fatalistic outcome. Everyone understood that this period of honor was a prelude to the ultimate sacrifice. As the day of the ceremony approached, the preparations intensified. The captive would be ritually bathed, his body painted with sacred symbols. He would be adorned with magnificent feather headdresses, precious jewelry, and elaborate garments, making him look more like a deity than a prisoner. These weren't just decorations. Each element was symbolic, connecting him to specific gods and reinforcing a sacred role. The community would hold great feasts and dances in his honor. He was the center of attention, the living embodiment of a vital connection between the human world and the divine. The final ritual was a grand public spectacle, the culmination of this entire process. While the methods varied between different cultures and time periods, a common theme was the idea of a glorious death. For example, in one well-documented Aztec ceremony, the captive, armed with a mock weapon, would face several fully armed elite warriors in a staged gladiatorial combat. The outcome was never in doubt, but it allowed the captive to die as a warrior, fighting bravely. His death was not seen as an execution, but as a sacred offering, a release of vital life energy, or asterisk. Tonali asterisk, needed to nourish the gods and ensure the continued existence of the cosmos. This concept is key. For these societies, the universe operated on a principle of reciprocity. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world and the sun, and humanity, in turn, owed them a debt of sacred energy to keep the sun moving, the rains falling, and the crops growing. The sacrifice of a brave warrior was the most potent offering possible. His heart and blood were considered the most precious substance, the divine water that sustained the gods and, by extension, all of life. This wasn't about cruelty for its own sake. It was a profound religious obligation, the fulfillment of a cosmic pact. After the sacrifice, the captive's body continued to be treated with ritual importance. Different parts might be distributed among the captor and other high-ranking nobles. This act, often misconstrued, was not about simple cannibalism. It was a form of sacred communion. By consuming a small part of the sacrificed, they believed they could absorb his divine essence and courage. The captor, having fulfilled his duty, would enter a period of deep mourning and ritual purification, acknowledging the gravity of his role in sending his son to the gods. Understanding this belief system helps us move beyond sensationalism. The journey of the sacred captive was a deeply symbolic and an honored path within their worldview. It was a system built on concepts of debt, reciprocity, and the cyclical nature of life and death. The captive wasn't just a victim. He was a participant, an honored messenger who played an indispensable role in maintaining the balance of the universe. It's a stark reminder that different cultures construct their reality in profoundly different ways. What seems brutal to us was, to them, a necessary and sacred duty. Thank you for joining us on this exploration into the world of ancient Mesoamerica. It's a subject that challenges our perspectives and encourages us to look deeper into the why behind historical practices. Welcome back to our series on Mesoamerican history. Today, in Chapter 10, we're diving into the intense world of the warrior class, exploring how young boys in societies like the Aztecs and Tlaxcalans were molded into formidable fighters from a very early age. This wasn't just about learning to fight. It was a complete way of life, ingrained in their culture, religion, and social structure. From the moment they could walk, the path to becoming a warrior began. Let's start with the Aztecs. A boy's destiny was often declared right at birth. The midwife would present the newborn with a tiny shield and bow, uttering chants that dedicated his life to the sun, to war, and to providing the ultimate sacrifice, if necessary. This set the stage for a childhood where military values were paramount. Fathers played a crucial role, teaching their sons from around age 3 or 4. The lessons were practical and harsh. They learned to carry small loads, to endure hardship, and to obey without question. Any sign of disobedience was met with strict discipline, which could include anything from stern warnings to being pricked with maguey thorns. The goal was to build resilience and an unwavering sense of duty. As they grew older, around the age of 6 or 7, their training intensified. They would accompany their fathers to the marketplace, carrying goods to build their strength. They learned to handle a canoe and cast a fishing net. These weren't just everyday chores. They were foundational exercises in strength, coordination, and endurance, all essential skills for a future warrior. The home environment was a constant preparation for the battlefield. Formal education began around age 15, and this is where the path diverged based on social class. Sons of the commoners, or Makewalton, typically attended the Tlaxcalan, which translates to House of Youth. There were several of these schools in each neighborhood, or Kalpuli, of Tenochtitlan. The Tlaxcalan focused primarily on military training. The regimen was grueling. The days were filled with physical labor, like building temples or canals, designed to develop incredible strength and stamina. In the evenings, the instruction shifted to the arts of war. Young men learned how to handle the iconic weapons of the Aztec arsenal. They practiced with the macoitl, a fearsome wooden club embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades, capable of inflicting terrible wounds. They mastered the otlatol, or spear thrower, which could launch a dart with incredible force and accuracy over long distances. They also trained with slings, bows and arrows, and protective gear like the ich, a type of quilted cotton armor that was surprisingly effective against projectiles. Life in the Tlaxcalan was deliberately Spartan. The boys slept on the bare ground, ate simple food, and were subjected to cold baths. This wasn't just about toughness. It was about stripping away individual comfort and fostering a collective, disciplined identity. The camaraderie forged in these harsh conditions was vital for unit cohesion on the battlefield. They learned to move as one, to trust their comrades, and to follow the commands of their superiors without hesitation. The ultimate goal for a student of the Tlaxcalan was to capture an enemy in battle, an act that marked their transition into a true warrior and granted them a higher social status. For the sons of the nobility, the PLI, the educational path, was different. They attended the Kamakak, or House of the Lineage. While the Kamakak also included military instruction, its curriculum was much broader and more intellectually demanding. These schools were connected to the temples and were run by priests. Here, the boys received a rigorous education in history, religion, astronomy, law, and governance. They were being groomed not just as warriors, but as the future leaders of the empire. The priests, judges, and high-ranking officials. The discipline at the Kamakak was even more severe than at the Tlaxcalan. The training was steeped in religious austerity. Students engaged in frequent fasting, bloodletting rituals, and all-night vigils. The purpose was to cultivate self-control, piety, and an unshakable inner resolve. They learned that leadership was a sacred duty, and that their personal desires were secondary to the needs of the state and the gods. Even within this elite institution, martial prowess was highly esteemed. Kamakak students also trained for war, often becoming the officers and commanders who would lead the Tlaxcalan graduates into battle. The combination of intellectual training and military skill made them exceptionally capable leaders. Now, let's turn our attention to the Tlaxcalans. As the staunch enemies of the Aztec Empire, their society was, in many ways, a mirror image of their rivals, especially when it came to military organization. Living under the constant threat of Aztec aggression, the Tlaxcalans developed a deeply militaristic culture out of necessity. Their survival depended on their ability to field a powerful and disciplined army. Like the Aztecs, Tlaxcalan boys were destined for war from a young age. Their training was similarly integrated into daily life and formalized in special schools. They learned to endure pain, hunger, and fatigue as a matter of course. Courage was the highest virtue, and cowardice was the ultimate shame, often punishable by death. This unforgiving code created warriors who were renowned for their ferocity and tenacity in battle. The Tlaxcalan weapon and combat training was very similar to that of the Aztecs. They were masters of the macuahuitl and the They also made extensive use of bows and arrows, with their Otomi allies being particularly famous for their archery skills. Their military organization was based on a confederation of 4 city-states, each contributing a contingent of warriors under the command of their own lord. This structure allowed for rapid mobilization and a flexible command system. One key difference was the Tlaxcalan ideal of warfare. While the Aztecs often engaged in flower wars, ritualized battles intended to capture prisoners for sacrifice, Tlaxcalans were frequently fighting for their very existence. Their wars with the Triple Alliance were brutal, no-holds-barred conflicts. This constant high-stakes warfare honed their skills to a razor's edge. Every Tlaxcalan man was a soldier, and their society was organized to support a perpetual war effort. The training they received instilled in them an intense hatred for the Mexica, and a powerful sense of Tlaxcalan identity and pride. So, for both a young Aztec and a young Tlax, childhood was a preparation for a single, defining purpose: to be a warrior. The methods were harsh, the discipline absolute, and the ideals profound. It was a system designed to produce individuals of incredible physical and mental fortitude, ready to defend their homeland, honor their gods, and achieve glory on the battlefield. The schools, whether the Tlaxcala or the Comacac, where the crucibles where boys were forged into the men who would decide the fate of Mesoamerica. This intense focus on military training created some of the most formidable warriors of the ancient world. Their skill, discipline, and courage were legendary, shaping the political landscape of the region for centuries. Understanding this warrior class is key to understanding the civilizations they fought for. Thanks for joining us for this chapter. I hope it gave you a deeper appreciation for the lives of these young warriors. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe for more, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you next time for Chapter 11. Welcome back to our series on the Aztec Empire. Today, we're re-stepping onto the battlefield of the Flower Wars to explore the incredible weapons and armor of the Aztec warriors. This isn't just about warfare, it's about artistry, symbolism, and a completely unique approach to combat. Let's start with the most famous Aztec weapon, the macu. Forget what you know about European swords. The macuahuitl wasn't a single piece of metal. It was a heavy, paddle-shaped club, usually made from strong oak wood. But what made it so terrifying were the razor-sharp obsidian blades embedded along its edges. These weren't just crude shards. They were prismatic blades, skillfully knapped by master craftsmen to be sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. A single blow from a macuahuitl could inflict devastating wounds, capable of maiming or even decapitating a horse in one strike. As the Spanish conquistadors would later report with horror, the craftsmanship was incredible. Each blade was set into the wood with a natural adhesive, like bitumen or pine resin, holding it firmly in place. To wield one of these required immense strength and skill. It was a weapon designed not just to kill, but to incapacitate and capture, a key objective in the Flower Wars where live captives for sacrifice were highly valued. The macuahuitl was more than a tool. It was a symbol of a warrior's power and prestige. But obsidian wasn't just used for the macu. The Aztecs were masters of this volcanic glass. They crafted spearheads, known as tapastapili, which were long wooden shafts tipped with broad, leaf-shaped obsidian points. These spears could be over 7 feet long, giving warriors a significant reach advantage. The design allowed for both thrusting and slashing, making them versatile weapons for formations. Smaller, javelin-like, throwing spears, called tlacocli, were hurled using a spear thrower, called an ot. This device acted as a leva, dramatically increasing the range and velocity of the projectile, making it a deadly long-range weapon that could pierce through armor. Even daggers, or tekbadal, were often tipped with finely worked obsidian or flint. These were personal sidearms, used for close-quarters combat or as ceremonial tools. The skill required to shape obsidian into these various forms without shattering it speaks volumes about the Aztec artisans. They understood the material's properties intimately, creating weapons that were both beautiful and brutally effective. Now, How did Aztec warriors protect themselves against these fearsome weapons? Their primary form of body armor was surprisingly advanced and perfectly suited to their climate. It was called Ichcohipale, a quilted cotton armor. This wasn't just a simple shirt. It was made of multiple layers of cotton, densely packed and stitched together, sometimes soaked in saltwater brine and left to dry, which made it incredibly stiff and resilient. This armor was remarkably effective, capable of stopping obsidian-tipped arrows and even slowing down the powerful blows. The Spanish, upon their arrival, were so impressed with the Ichcohipale that many of them abandoned their own heavy, hot steel breastplates in favor of the lighter, more comfortable, and surprisingly protective Aztec cotton armor. It offered excellent mobility, which was crucial in the fast-paced, individualistic combat style of the Aztecs. To protect their heads, warriors wore elaborate helmets, often carved from wood and adorned with feathers, animal hides, and precious materials. These weren't just for protection. They were a critical part of a warrior's identity and rank. A helmet might be shaped like the head of a jaguar, an eagle, or even a mythical creature, signifying the warrior's membership in an elite society like the jaguar or eagle warriors. These helmets were both intimidating and symbolic, transforming the warrior into a living embodiment of a powerful, sacred animal. Complementing the armor was the shield, or chima. These were not simple, plain shields. They were works of art, typically round and made from wood or woven reeds. They were covered in intricate featherwork, creating stunning mosaics of color and design. Each shield was unique, its patterns and symbols telling a story. They might depict deities, historical events, or symbols representing the warrior's city-state or personal achievements. The feathers used were from exotic birds like the quetzal and macaw, making these shields incredibly valuable. A kimale wasn't just defensive, it was a status symbol, a personal banner carried into battle. Elite warriors had multiple shields for different occasions, some purely for ceremony and others for war. The artistry was so fine that the Spanish conquistadors collected them as treasures to send back to the King of Spain. Like the rest of their attire, the shield was a fusion of practical function and deep symbolic meaning. Finally, let's talk about the complete war attire. An Aztec warrior going into a flower war was a truly spectacular sight. Their entire outfit, known as the Tlahuitli, was a full bodysuit, often decorated to resemble the animal of their warrior society. Imagine a jaguar warrior, covered head to toe in a real jaguar skin, their face peering out from the animal's open jaws. Or an eagle warrior, adorned with magnificent eagle feathers, their helmet a sculpted eagle head with a sharp beak. These suits were more than just uniforms. They were believed to bestow upon the warrior the spirit and strength of the animal they represented. The colors, the feathers, the patterns, everything had meaning. It communicated rank, achievements, and allegiance. A battlefield would have been a vibrant, terrifying kaleidoscope of colors and animal forms, a far cry from the drab metal armies of Europe. For the Aztecs, war was a sacred performance, and their attire was their costume, transforming them from mere men into spiritual avatars of destruction and divine power. From the razor-sharp obsidian of the Macuahuitl to the brilliant featherwork of the Shimali, Aztec military equipment was a testament to their ingenuity, artistry, and deep spiritual beliefs. It shows us that, for the Aztecs, the line between craftsman, warrior, and priest was often beautifully and terrifyingly blurred. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the weapons of the Flower Wars. It is a fascinating look at a culture that approached conflict in a way that was entirely its own. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the incredible history of the Aztec Empire. We'll see you in the next chapter. Ever wondered how ancient battles could be... scheduled? Welcome to the world of the Aztec Flower Wars, where combat was less about surprise attacks and more about mutually agreed upon appointments with destiny. These weren't chaotic free-for-all. They were highly organized events, almost like a deadly, sacred sport. So, how did they pick the battlefield? It wasn't random. The Aztec Triple Alliance, made up of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, their rivals, like the city-states of Tlaxcala or Huexotzinco, would choose a specific location through diplomatic channels. These locations were often neutral territories, sacred plains, or recognized flower lands, known as Think of them as designated arenas, sanctified for ritual combat. The idea was to ensure both sides had a fair journey, and that the battle occurred on holy ground, fit for the gods. A place like Cutepec, or Eagle Hill, was a famous site for these prearranged confrontations. Emissaries would travel between the cities, carrying messages to set the date and place, ensuring everyone was ready for the impending ceremony of war. Once the location was set, the timing was just as crucial. Flower wars weren't year-round events. They were typically scheduled during the dry season, from around late autumn to early spring. This made perfect practical sense. The main agricultural season was over, meaning the peasant farmers who made up the bulk of the army were available to fight. Rainy seasons would turn the roads into impassable mud pits and make large-scale troop movements a logistical nightmare. So, they fought when the weather was clear and the harvests were in, allowing society to function without major disruption. The chosen day often had astrological significance, aligning with the sacred 260-day calendar to please the gods and ensure the cosmic importance of the event. With the when and where decided, let's talk about the rules of engagement. This is what truly separates flower wars from typical warfare. The primary goal wasn't to conquer territory or annihilate the enemy. The main objective was to capture, not kill. Warriors were trained specifically to subdue their opponents and take them alive. This required immense skill and restraint. Killing an enemy on the battlefield was seen as clumsy and inefficient. A live captive was far more valuable, as they were destined for ritual sacrifice back in the victor's city, a profound offering to gods like Witsi. This focus on capture fundamentally shaped the combat style. Weapons were designed more to wound and incapacitate than to deliver a quick, lethal blow. The makua weedle, a wooden club embedded with sharp obsidian blades, could be used to slash and disable, but a skilled warrior would use its flat side to stun an opponent. This system created a unique battlefield dynamic. Imagine two armies, tens of thousands strong, meeting on a designated plain. There wouldn't be an immediate, chaotic charge. Instead, the battle would open with a great deal of ceremony. Priests would burn incense, chant prayers, and bless the warriors. Trumpets made from conch shells would blare, and drums would beat a rhythmic pulse, signaling the start of the engagement. The highest-ranking nobles and elite warriors from eagle and jaguar societies would often engage first, seeking to prove their valor in one-on-one duels. It was a chance for individual glory, a performance for both their comrades and the gods. The combat was a series of these smaller, controlled engagements rather than a single, massive melee. It was a spectacle of courage, skill, and sacred duty. Picture the scene. The sun rises over the high plains of central Mexico, casting a golden light on two armies facing each other. The air is cool and crisp. On one side, the warriors of Tenochtitlan, their shields shimmering with intricate featherwork and their banners held high. On the other, the fierce Tlaxcalans, their faces painted for war. There's no hate-filled screaming, but a tense, respectful silence, broken only by the sounds of priests and the distant call of a trumpet. The warriors march in perfect formation, their footsteps a soft thunder on the dry earth. This isn't a march of conquest. It's a solemn procession towards a sacred duty. The air smells of copal incense and the dew on the morning grass. As the battle begins, it's a dance of feints and lunges. A jaguar warrior, clad in the spotted hide of his namesake, expertly deflects a blow from an obsidian-edged spear. He uses his shield to unbalance his opponent, not to kill, but to create an opening for capture. Nearby, two champions circle each other, their makua weedle clubs held ready. They trade blows that are carefully aimed to wound, not to maim. A warrior might be struck on the leg, brought to his knees, and then surrounded and taken. The battle flows in ebb when a significant number of captives are taken by one side, or when the commanders feel enough has been done to satisfy the ritual's purpose. The battle might simply ... end. Horns would sound the retreat, and both armies would withdraw from the field, carrying their captives and their wounded. There was no shame in retreat. The purpose of the day had been fulfilled. These captured warriors faced a grim but honorable fate. They were not treated as prisoners of war in our modern sense. They were often housed, fed well, and treated with a degree of respect as they awaited their final ceremony. To be sacrificed was the highest honor a captured warrior could achieve. It was believed their death would nourish the sun, keep the cosmos in balance, and ensure the continuation of life. For the Aztec warrior who captured them, it was the ultimate mark of prowess, leading to social advancement, titles, and wealth. The entire system, from the initial diplomatic agreement to the final sacrifice, was a deeply embedded part of his Aztec military, political, and religious life. The Flower Wars were a complex institution, a unique blend of diplomacy, religion, and warfare. They provided a constant stream of captives for sacrifice, a crucial training ground for young warriors, and a way for the Aztec Empire to display its military might, without engaging in costly all-out wars of conquest against its strongest rivals. It was a system that maintained a delicate balance of power, a perpetual, low-intensity conflict that served a vital function in their worldview. Far from being simple, chaotic battles, they were orchestrated rituals of profound significance. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the organized chaos of the Flower Wars. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into history. See you next time. Imagine living in a city that's like an island, but instead of being surrounded by water, you're surrounded by enemies on all sides. For centuries, this was the reality for the people of Tlaxcala, a powerful confederation in what is now modern-day Mexico. Their story is one of incredible resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to thrive even under constant pressure. Today, we're diving deep into the daily life of the Tlaxcalans, a people who refused to bow to the mighty Aztec Empire. The biggest challenge facing Tlaxcala was its complete economic blockade. The Aztecs, or the Mexica as they called themselves, controlled all the major trade routes. This meant the Tlaxcalans were cut off from essential goods that other city-states took for granted. Think about the things we use every day. For them, the most noticeable absence was salt. Can you imagine a diet with almost no salt? They had to get creative, extracting a bitter-tasting saltpeter from the soil, a poor substitute for the real thing. Luxury goods were even rarer. Brightly colored cotton textiles. Forget it. The Tlaxcalans primarily wore clothes made from the rough fibers of the maguey plant, known as precious metals like gold and silver, and vibrant feathers from tropical birds, which were central to Mesoamerican art and ceremony, were almost impossible to obtain. This blockade wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a constant, daily reminder of their isolation and the hostility that surrounded them. So how did a city-state not just survive, but flourish under these conditions? The answer lies in their incredible self-sufficiency and ingenuity, particularly in agriculture. Tlaxcala was a densely populated region, and feeding everyone was a monumental task. They became masters of intensive farming. On the hillsides, they built extensive systems of stone-faced terraces, known as These weren't just simple steps. They were sophisticated engineering projects that prevented soil erosion, managed water flow, and turned steep, unusable slopes into fertile farmland. This allowed them to maximize every square inch of available land. Their primary crops were the three sisters of Mesoamerican agriculture: maize, beans, and squash. These plants have a symbiotic relationship. The corn provides a stalk for the beans to climb. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, enriching it for the other plants, and the broad leaves of the squash shade the ground, preventing weeds and conserving moisture. This brilliant agricultural strategy formed the backbone of their food supply and their survival. They also cultivated amaranth, chia, and of course, the versatile maguey plant, which provided not just fiber for clothes but also the nutritious agua or honey water that could be fermented into the alcoholic beverage, pulque. Despite the constant threat of war and the hardships of the blockade, life in Tlaxcala was not all gloom and doom. The Tlaxcalans had a rich cultural and spiritual life, and their festivals were vibrant, colorful affairs. These ceremonies were deeply tied to the agricultural calendar and their pantheon of gods. One of the most important deities was Camaxtli, a god of the hunt, war, and fate, who was considered the patron deity of the Tlaxcalan people. Festivals in his honor would have been major events, likely involving elaborate processions, music played on drums, flutes, and rattles, and ritual dances performed by warriors and priests. In full regalia, Another key figure was the goddess of love and fertility. Her festivals would have celebrated life, creation, and the beauty of nature, with offerings of flowers and perhaps even performances of poetry and song. These gatherings were more than just religious observances. They were crucial for community cohesion. They brought people from the 4 allied city-states of the Confederation together, reinforcing their shared identity, their collective strength, and their unified defiance against the Aztecs. In these moments of celebration, they could forget the blockade for a while and simply beat, but the shadow of war was never far away. The Tlaxcalan Aztec conflict wasn't a constant war. Instead, it was often characterized by a specific type of ritualized combat known as the Flowery Wars, these were prearranged battles fought on designated sacred fields. Now, there's a lot of debate among historians about the primary purpose of these wars. The traditional Aztec view, recorded by the Spanish, was that these battles were for capturing warriors for human sacrifice to appease their gods, particularly Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war. For the Aztecs, sacrifice was essential to keep the cosmos in balance. However, many scholars now believe this is only part of the story, and possibly a biased one. For the Tlaxcalans, and likely for the Aztec warriors on the ground, these wars served a very practical purpose. They were the ultimate training ground. It was a way to keep their armies battle-hardened, test new tactics, and allow young warriors to prove their mettle and gain social status. Imagine a perpetual military exercise where the stakes were life and death. This constant state of readiness forged the Tlaxcalans into some of the most formidable warriors in all of Mesoamerica. Every man was a potential soldier, and from a young age, boys were trained in combat. This military prowess was not a choice. It was a necessity. It was the bedrock of their independence. This warrior culture permeated every aspect of Tlaxcalan society. A man's worth was often measured by his bravery on the battlefield. Capturing an enemy, not necessarily killing them, was the highest honor. Social mobility was possible through military success. A commoner who distinguished himself in battle could rise through the ranks, gaining titles, land, and respect. Their government itself was a unique model. It wasn't a monarchy ruled by a single king like the Aztecs. Tlaxcala was a confederacy of 4 allied city-states, each with its own ruler, or Tecutli. Major decisions, especially concerning war and foreign policy, were made by a council composed of these rulers and other leading nobles. This system of shared power likely contributed to their political stability and their ability to present a united front against their enemies. It was a republic in a world of empires. This collective leadership, combined with a fierce sense of independence and a shared identity forged through generations of conflict, was the glue that held Tlaxcala together. So when Hernan Cortes and his Spanish conquistadors arrived on the coast in 1519, they didn't just stumble upon another tribe to conquer. They found a sophisticated, organized, and battle-hardened nation with a deep-seated hatred for the Aztec Empire. The Tlaxcalans initially fought the Spanish fiercely, showcasing their military skill and proving to be formidable opponents. But after a series of intense battles, they saw a strategic opportunity. This was their chance to finally defeat their age-old enemy. The Tlaxcalans made a strategic alliance with Cortes, providing him with tens of thousands of elite warriors, crucial logistical support, and a safe haven to retreat and regroup. Without the Tlaxcalans, it is highly unlikely that Cortes' small force could have ever conquered the vast and powerful Aztec Empire. Their resilience, born from centuries of isolation and conflict, ultimately made them the kingmakers of the conquest. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is often shaped not just by the great empires, but by the defiant spirit of those who refuse to be broken. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the heart of Tlaxcala. It's a story that deserves to be told. A story of strength in the face of overwhelming odds. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into history. And let me know in the comments what other hidden histories you'd like to explore. See you next time. Have you ever wondered what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? In ancient Mesoamerica, that unstoppable force was the mighty Aztec Empire, and the immovable object was a small, defiant confederacy called Tlaxcala. This wasn't just a simple story of David versus Goliath. It was a complex web of strategy, ritual, and sheer stubbornness that lasted for decades. Welcome to our deep dive into the Aztec Empire's greatest headache and their relentless, yet ultimately futile, attempts to bring Tlaxcala to its knees. The Aztec Empire, also known as the Triple Alliance, was a powerhouse. From their magnificent capital Tenochtitlan, they expanded their dominion across central Mexico through a combination of brilliant military campaigns and shrewd political maneuvering. Conquered city-states were forced to pay tribute, a constant flow of goods like food, textiles, precious metals, and exotic feathers that fueled the Aztec economy and sustained its lavish lifestyle. By the late 15th century, the Aztecs had created a vast network of subject states, all feeding into the heart of the empire. But right in the middle of this sprawling domain, like a thorn in the lion's paw, sat, unlike its neighbors, Tlaxcala refused to bow. It was a confederation of 4 allied city-states, nestled in a high mountain valley, fiercely independent and ready to defend that independence at all costs. For the Aztecs, this was more than just an annoyance. It was a direct challenge to their authority and a disruption to the perfect order of their empire. Imagine drawing a map of your territory, and there's a big, glaring hole right in the center that you just can't fill. That was Tlaxcala. So the Aztecs decided, if we can't conquer them outright just yet, we'll strangle them. This began a long-term strategy of total economic and diplomatic isolation. Think of it as a massive, empire-wide embargo. The first and most crucial part of this strategy was the economic blockade. The Aztecs controlled all the major trade routes that crisscrossed Mesoamerica. They systematically cut Tlaxcala off from these vital arteries of commerce. What did this mean for the average Tlaxcalan? It meant a life without many of the goods other Mesoamerican peoples took for granted. One of the most critical items denied to them was salt. Salt wasn't just for flavor. It was a crucial preservative for food. The Tlaxcalans had to make do with local, less effective salt substitutes, a constant, daily reminder of their isolation. Cotton was another major one. The Tlaxcalan highlands were too cold to grow cotton, so they couldn't produce their own fine textiles. While Aztec nobles adorned themselves in vibrant cotton cloaks, the Tlaxcalans had to rely on rougher fibers from agave plants. The same went for luxury items like cacao beans, which were used as currency, and to make a prestigious chocolate drink, and the brilliant green feathers of the quetzal bird, essential for ceremonial attire. The Aztec blockade was designed to make life in Tlaxcala so difficult, so devoid of comfort and prestige, that its people would eventually break. The Aztecs hoped the Tlaxcalan elite would grow tired of their rough-spun clothes and yearn for the luxuries their Aztec counterparts enjoyed. They hoped the common people would grow weary of their bland, unsalted food. The psychological pressure was immense. Every time a Tlaxcalan saw a trader from an Aztec-Tlaxcala territory, they were reminded of what they were missing. It was a constant war of attrition, fought not on the battlefield, but in the marketplace and the kitchen. Alongside the economic squeeze, the Aztecs waged a diplomatic war. They made it clear to all surrounding city-states: you are either with us or against us. Any city that dared to trade with or ally with Tlaxcala would face the full wrath of the Aztec military machine. This turned Tlaxcala into a political island. They were surrounded on all sides by states that were either conquered subjects of the Aztecs or were too terrified to offer them any support. The message was clear: Tlaxcala stands alone. The Aztecs would send emissaries to neighboring lords, showering them with gifts and promising them favor, all while pointing to Tlaxcala as an example of what happens to those who defy the empire. This diplomatic isolation was meant to demoralize the Tlaxcalans, to make them feel hopeless and abandoned in a world dominated by their greatest enemy. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Why didn't the Aztecs, with their massive, well-trained army, just launch an all-out invasion and crush Tlaxcala once and for all? They certainly had the manpower. The answer lies in a unique and fascinating aspect of Aztec culture: the flower wars. These weren't wars of conquest in the traditional sense. Flower wars were prearranged, ritualized battles fought between the Aztecs and their enemies, most notably Tlaxcala and its allies. The primary goal wasn't to gain territory or plunder resources. Instead, it was to capture enemy warriors alive. Why? For the most important ritual in the Aztec world, Human sacrifice, according to Aztec cosmology, the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, was in a constant battle against the forces of darkness. To keep the sun rising every day and prevent the world from plunging into eternal night, he needed nourishment, and that nourishment was chalcahudal, or precious water. Human blood, the hearts of brave, captured warriors were considered the most potent offering to the gods. Therefore, a steady supply of high-quality captives was a state necessity. It was a religious imperative. The Flower Wars provided a perfect solution. They were a controlled, recurring source of sacrificial victims without the logistical chaos and heavy losses of a full-scale war of annihilation. For the Aztecs, these battles served a dual purpose. They fulfilled a sacred duty to the gods, and they acted as a live-fire training ground for their elite warriors. Young Aztec nobles could prove their valor and climb the social ladder by capturing enemies on the battlefield. A warrior who captured 4 or 5 enemies could achieve the high rank of a jaguar or eagle knight. So, the Flower Wars were deeply embedded in the Aztec military, social, and religious structure. Tlaxcala, being a formidable and permanently hostile neighbor, was the ideal opponent for these ritual conflicts. The Tlaxcalan warriors were renowned for their skill and bravery, making them worthy opponents and, therefore, worthy sacrifices. So, a strange, grim symbiosis developed. The Aztecs needed Tlaxcala as a perpetual enemy, a farm for harvesting captives to feed their gods. This need for ritual captives acted as a brake on their desire for total conquest. If they completely destroyed Tlaxcala, where would they get their flowers for the gods? This created a paradoxical situation. The Aztecs were simultaneously trying to strangle Tlaxcala into submission through a blockade, while also needing them to remain strong enough to put up a good fight in the Flower Wars. It was a delicate and ultimately unstable balancing act. For the Tlaxcalans, the situation was far from ideal. They were fighting for their very survival. While the Aztecs saw the Flower Wars as a ritual, for the Tlaxcalans, every battle was a desperate defense of their homeland. Every warrior captured was a son, brother, or father lost forever. The constant warfare and the grinding economic hardship forged an exceptionally resilient and militaristic society. Every Tlaxcalan man was a soldier. Their hatred for the Aztecs wasn't abstract or political. It was personal and deeply ingrained, fueled by generations of conflict and deprivation. They hadn't just resisted the Aztecs, they had survived them. They had learned to live without salt and cotton, and they had honed their military skills to a razor's edge in the bloody crucible of the Flower Wars. This long and bitter history of resistance had a profound consequence that the Aztecs could never have foreseen. By trying to isolate and contain Tlaxcala, they had inadvertently created their own nemesis. They had cultivated a pocket of intense, focused hatred right on their doorstep. For decades, Tlaxcala had been surrounded, blockaded, and bled, but it had not broken. Instead, it had hardened. And then, in 1519, everything changed. Strange ships appeared on the coast, carrying men with pale skin, metal armor, and weapons that spat fire. When Hernan Cortes and his small band of conquistadors began their march inland, they had no idea they were about to walk straight into this ancient, bitter feud. After a series of fierce initial battles, the Spanish and the Tlaxcalans realized they had a common enemy. For Cortes, an alliance with these seasoned, local warriors was a godsend. For the Tlaxcalans, it was the opportunity they had been waiting for nearly a century. It was a chance for vengeance. The Aztec strategy, which had seemed so clever balancing economic pressure with ritual warfare, ultimately backfired in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Their relentless pressure had not crushed Tlaxcala. It had forged it into the perfect weapon to be used against them. The thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors who joined forces with Cortes provided the critical manpower, the local knowledge, and the burning desire for revenge that were essential for the siege and eventual fall of the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan. The story of the Aztecs and Tlaxcala is a powerful lesson in unintended consequences. It shows how even the most powerful empires can be undone by overlooking the enduring power of human will and the deep-seated desire for independence. The Aztec Empire, in all its might and sophistication, failed to understand that by trying to make an example of Tlaxcala, they were creating the very architects of their own destruction. It's a complex and tragic tale, a reminder that history is often shaped not by the grand plans of emperors, but by the stubborn resistance of those who refuse to kneel. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into Mesoamerican history fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the past. Let us know in the comments what other historical rivalries you'd like to see us cover. See you next time. It's a powerful and often overlooked aspect of history, the wars that ended not with a bang, but with a somber, exhausting silence. We often think of war in terms of clear winners and losers, of parades and treaties that redraw the map. But what happens when the dust settles, and nothing has really changed, except for the number of graves? Imagine this. Two nations, fueled by ambition, ideology, or old grievances, pour their heart and soul into a conflict. Propaganda posts a scream of glorious destiny, and young men march off to the front lines, convinced they are fighting for a cause greater than themselves. The initial battles are fierce. Generals devise brilliant strategies, and for a moment, it seems like one side might just break through. They gain a few miles of territory, capture a key town, and the headlines back home declare a turning point. But then, the other side digs in. They counterattack. The town is retaken. The lines shift back, and the momentary victory evaporates. This pattern repeats itself, over and over. A brutal, grinding rhythm of attack and count. The names of battles become legendary not for their strategic genius, but for their sheer, horrifying cost. Fields turn into seas of mud and craters. Forests are splintered into toothpicks. Villages that had stood for centuries are wiped off the map. Let's talk about the human cost, because that's where the real story lies. We're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of lives, each one a person with a family, with dreams, with a future that was stolen from them in a trench or on a battlefield. For every soldier who fell, there were countless others wounded, their bodies and minds scarred forever. And then there were the prisoners of war, tens of thousands of them, herded into camps, living in squalor, uncertain if they would ever see home again. Their capture was tallied as a win for the enemy. But what did it really achieve? It just removed more people from the world, trading their freedom for a temporary, strategic advantage that would soon be nullified. Think about the sheer scale of the resources poured into this stalemate. Entire economies were reconfigured for war. Factories that once made cars or tractors now churned out tanks and shells. Food was rationed. Society was mobilized. All this effort, all this sacrifice, all directed towards a goal that was becoming increasingly blurry. What were they even fighting for anymore? For many soldiers on the front lines, the grand political objectives had faded into the background. Survival was the only goal. To make it through one more day, one more artillery barrage, one more charge across no man's. After years of this relentless, soul-crushing warfare, the breaking point is reached. But it's not a glorious breakthrough. It's exhaustion. Both sides are bled white. Their economies are shattered, their populations are weary, and their armies are on the verge of collapse. There is no final, decisive battle that ends it all. Instead, there are hushed negotiations, quiet handshakes, and a treaty that essentially says, let's just stop. And here is the ultimate irony, the heart of this victory without triumph. After all the bloodshed, after all the sacrifice, after all the years of struggle, the borders remain almost exactly where they were when the war began. The lines on the map are unchanged. The political stalemate that started the conflict might still be there, simmering beneath the surface. So, who won? It's a question that historians and veterans would ask for generations. One side might claim a moral victory, saying they successfully defended their homeland. The other might claim they thwarted the enemy's ambitions. But these are hollow claims when measured against the cost. There were no victory parades that could erase the memory of the lost. There were no victory speeches that could comfort the millions of grieving families. The real legacy of such a war is a profound sense of loss and futility. A generation of young men was decimated. The survivors came home to a world that didn't understand what they had been through. They were called heroes, but they often felt like ghosts, haunted by the faces of fallen comrades and the pointlessness of it all. This is the lost generation, a term that perfectly captures the feeling of being adrift in a post-war world that no longer made sense. These conflicts serve as a powerful, sobering lesson. They teach us that war is not a simple equation of winning and losing. Sometimes, the only outcome is mutual destruction. The greatest triumph is not found in conquering territory, but in the wisdom to avoid such a catastrophe in the first place. The memorials that dot the landscapes of these former battlefields don't celebrate victory. They are solemn reminders of the price of failure, the failure of diplomacy, the failure of humanity, and the failure to see that in some wars there are no winners at all, only survivors. When we look back at these chapters of history, it's crucial to remember this. The stories are not about glorious charges or brilliant generals. They are about the tragedy of stalemate, the quiet sorrow of a victory that feels like a defeat, and the hard-won peace that arrived too late for far, far too many. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into a more complex side of history. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the past. See you next time. As the 15th century drew to a close, a palpable tension began to settle over the vibrant world of Mesoamerica. On the surface, the Aztec Empire, the Triple Alliance, was at the zenith of its power. The magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, an island metropolis of canals and pyramids, stood as the undisputed center of the known world. Its markets overflowed with goods from every corner of the ever-vibrant feathers, precious jade, rich cacao, and shimmering gold. The armies of the Mexica were feared and respected, their influence stretching from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific Ocean. To an outside observer, the empire seemed eternal, as solid as the stone from which its temples were carved. But for those living within its vast domains, subtle yet undeniable signs of change were beginning to appear, like cracks in a finely painted vase, visible only to those who looked closely. The most immediate and grating of these changes was the ever-increasing burden of tribute demanded by Tenochtitlan. For generations, conquered city-states, the Alt-Petal, had paid their dues to the empire. It was the price of defeat, the cost of maintaining the cosmic order as the Aztecs saw it. But under the rule of Emperor Hahetzatal, who reigned until 1502, these demands had escalated to unprecedented levels. It was no longer just about supplying food, textiles, and luxury goods. The quotas grew larger, the collections more frequent and aggressive. More importantly, the demand for human lives, for sacrifice at the Great Temple, the Temple Mayor, had soared. After the temple's grand rededication in 1487, a ceremony that allegedly involved the sacrifice of thousands, the need for captives became insatiable. This wasn't just a political or economic strain. It was a profound spiritual and demographic drain on the provinces. Whispers of resentment, once confined to the shadows, grew louder in the tributary towns. Local rulers, the Tlatoani, found themselves in an impossible position, caught between the relentless demands of their Aztec overlords and the growing anger of their own people. The delicate balance of power, a complex web of alliances, intimidation, and mutual benefit, was beginning to fray at the edges. This external pressure from the imperial core naturally fueled internal tensions within the subject states. For years, many had accepted Aztec rule as a fact of life. Some had even prospered under the imperial peace, the Pax Azteca, which allowed trade to flourish. But as the tribute burden became unbearable, old rivalries and grievances city-states that had once been equals now found themselves in a bitter competition to please their masters in Tenochtitlan. Sometimes at each other's expense, ambitious local lords saw an opportunity in the growing discontent, secretly plotting and forging clandestine alliances, hoping to one day challenge the empire's might. The Tlaxcalans, fierce rivals who had never been fully conquered by the Aztecs, watched these developments with keen interest. Their independent kingdom stood as a beacon of defiance, and their spies moved through the empire, gathering intelligence and fanning the flames of rebellion. The seeds of discord were being sown, and they were finding fertile ground in the overexploited and resentful provinces. The empire, which seemed like a monolithic entity from afar, was in reality a mosaic of diverse peoples, many of whom longed for the return of their former autonomy. This simmering political and social unrest was amplified by a wave of unsettling rumors and strange omens that seemed to creep across the land. In a world where the sacred and the mundane were inextricably linked, where the gods were believed to directly influence daily life, these signs were taken with utmost seriousness. People began to speak of unusual phenomena. Fishermen on Lake Texcoco reported seeing a pillar of fire in the night sky, a blazing light that seemed to touch the heavens. The temple was said to have spontaneously burst into flames without any apparent cause. its wooden beams consumed by a fire that water could not quench. There were tales of a wailing woman who roamed the streets of Tenochtitlan late at night, crying out for her lost, a chilling prophecy of loss and despair. Even the natural world seemed to be in turmoil. A comet, described as a fiery ear of corn, streaked across the daytime sky, a sight that terrified all who saw it. The lake's waters were said to have boiled and surged, flooding parts of the capital without any storm or earthquake. These omens were not just isolated events, they formed a narrative of impending doom. Priests and soothsayers struggled to interpret their meaning, their pronouncements often vague and filled with foreboding. These stories traveled along the trade routes, carried by merchants and messengers, spreading from the heart of the empire to its farthest reaches. For the common people, already burdened by heavy taxes and the fear of war, these portents added a layer of deep psychological anxiety. Was the sun god Huitzilopochtli displeased? Were the foundations of the cosmos beginning to shake? The rumors fed into the existing discontent, creating a sense of inevitability, a feeling that the world as they knew it was teetering on the brink of a profound and terrifying transformation. The prophecies spoke of the return of a long-lost deity from the east, a feathered serpent god named Quetzalcoatl who was destined to reclaim his kingdom. In the late 1400s, this was still a myth, a story from the distant past. But as the signs multiplied and the pressures on the empire grew, the myth began to feel more like a premonition. So, as the 15th century gave way to the 16th, the Aztec Empire was a place of deep contradictions. It was a civilization at the peak of its glory, yet it was also an empire groaning under its own weight. The demands of the center were alienating the periphery, the internal resentments were reaching a boiling point, and a pervasive sense of dread, fueled by inexplicable omens, was spreading through the populace. The world was changing. The very air seemed to crackle with an unspoken premonition that the fifth sun, the era of Aztec dominion, was approaching its twilight. No one could have known what form this change would take, who or what would arrive from beyond the horizon, but the feeling was inescapable. The great and powerful Aztec Empire, for all its might and splendor, was becoming fragile. The stage was being set for a cataclysm that would reshape their world forever. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past fascinating, please like, share, and subscribe for more chapters of our story. The year is 1519. In the grand city of Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire, life pulses with a familiar rhythm. Markets hum with the exchange of goods. Priests ascend the great temples to honor the gods, and the emperor, Montezuma II, rules with a firm but anxious hand. Beyond the capital, in the rival city-state of Tlaxcala, a similar cycle of life unfolds, though shaded by a deep-seated resentment for their powerful Aztec neighbors. The world, as they know it, is vast, complex, and entirely their own. But something is stirring on the distant edges of their awareness, a whisper carried on the coastal winds. It begins subtly, with fragmented reports from traders and fishermen returning from the shores of the great eastern sea, what we now call the Gulf of Mexico. They speak of strange sightings, of mountains floating on the water. These aren't the canoes they know, carved from single trees, but colossal structures with great white wings that catch the wind like clouds. The stories are dismissed at first, chalked up to tired eyes or too much sun. Floating mountains, it sounds like a myth, a tall tale told over evening fires. Who could build such things? But the rumors persist, growing more detailed and more unsettling with each telling. Messengers, fleet-footed runners, who traverse the empire's intricate road system, start bringing more specific news. They speak not just of floating mountains, but of men emerging from them. Men with skin as pale as limestone, hair on their faces as golden as the sun, and eyes the color of the sky. They wear peculiar clothing that shines like polished metal, reflecting the tropical light in blinding flashes. These strangers carry sticks that speak with the voice of thunder and smoke, capable of felling a tree from a distance. The descriptions are so alien, so far outside the realm of known human experience, that they defy easy explanation. In Tenochtitlan, Moctezuma grows deeply troubled. He is a man of great piety and learning, steeped in the prophecies and histories of his people. He consults his most trusted priests and soothsayers, seeking to understand the meaning of these omens. The timing is eerie. Ancient prophecies spoke of the return of a powerful god, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. The legends said Quetzalcoatl had departed across the eastern sea long ago, promising to one day return from the east in a year of one reed on the sacred calendar. By a chilling coincidence, 1519 is precisely that year, the year of one red. Could these pale-skinned strangers be the gods, or their emissaries, returning as foretold? The possibility is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Fear, disguised as caution, begins to creep into the highest echelons of the Aztec court. Moctezuma dispatches his own scouts and ambassadors to the coast. He instructs them to observe these newcomers from a distance, to learn everything they can, and, most importantly, to offer them magnificent gifts. Perhaps, if they are gods, they can be appeased. The gifts are a testament to the wealth of his empire. Intricate precios hadean, most dazzling of all, massive discs of hammered gold and silver, one representing the sun, the other the moon. He hopes these offerings will satisfy the visitors and encourage them to depart. It is a gesture born of both reverence and a desperate hope to keep the unknown at bay. The ambassadors are ordered not to engage in hostilities, but simply to report back on the nature and intent of these beings. Meanwhile, 100 miles to the east, in the highlands, the leaders of Tlaxcala hear the same rumors, but their reaction is different. As the sworn enemies of the Aztecs, they see not a divine visitation, but a potential opportunity. For generations, they have resisted Aztec domination, fighting bloody flower wars designed to capture warriors for sacrifice. They are surrounded, an island of defiance in a sea of Aztec power. Any new force, any disruption to the existing order, could potentially be leveraged to their advantage. They listen to the stories of the strangers' thundersticks, and their strange, deer-like creatures they ride upon, which we know as horses. The Tlaxcalans are warriors, pragmatic and battle-hardened. They don't immediately think of gods. They think of power. Could these newcomers be the allies they need to finally break the Aztec yoke? While Moctezuma sends gifts of appeasement, the Tlaxcalans begin to watch with a calculating eye, weighing the risks and rewards. Back on the coast, the strangers have a name: the Spanish, led by a man named Hernan Cortes. This small expedition is driven by ambitions far more earthly than the Aztecs can imagine. They are seeking gold, glory, and souls to convert for their own king and their own god. When Moctezuma's ambassadors arrive and present their lavish gifts, the effect is the opposite of what the emperor intended. The sight of so much gold doesn't satisfy the Spanish. It ignites their ambition. It confirms the rumors they had heard of a wealthy, powerful empire hidden deep in the interior of this new land. The gifts are not seen as a gesture of peace to be respected, but as a sample of the immense riches that await them. Cortes, a master of manipulation and strategy, understands immediately that he is dealing with a civilization of incredible wealth and sophistication. He also senses the fear and uncertainty behind the grand welcome. He graciously accepts the presents, but in his mind, the plan is already shifting. Simple exploration is no longer enough. The goal is now conquest. The reports that flow back to Moctezuma from his ambassadors only deepen his anxiety. They describe the strangers' food, their weapons, and their powerful animals that are unlike anything in the Americas. They tell of how the Spanish fired one of their cannons, and the sound shattered the sky, and the stone ball obliterated a tree, causing the Aztec observers to faint in terror. They describe how the Spanish seemed unimpressed by the ritual bloodletting offered by the priests, showing disgust rather than reverence. Everything about them is foreign, their customs incomprehensible, their power undeniable. The emperor is caught in a web of indecision. Are they gods to be worshipped or invaders to be repelled? Attacking them might incur divine wrath. Welcoming them might be an invitation to destruction. As the weeks turn into months, the Spanish, led by Cortes, begin their slow, methodical advance inland. They are a tiny force, just a few hundred men, but they possess technological advantages and a ruthless determination that the native peoples have never encountered. They learn of the political landscape, of the deep hatred many city-states hold for the Aztecs. They hear of Tlaxcala's defiance and see a path forward not through brute force alone, but through alliance and exploitation of existing rivalries. The quiet rumors that once whispered along the coast have now become a storm gathering on the horizon. The floating mountains have landed, and their passengers are marching inland, step by step, towards the heart of the Aztec world. The arrival was not an explosion, but a slow, creeping shadow. A shadow whose full, terrifying shape was only just beginning to be understood in the halls of Tenochtitlan and Tlaxcala. The clash of two worlds, a collision that will reshape a continent, is no longer a matter of prophecy. It is now inevitable. The strangers have arrived. Hey everyone, welcome back to our series on the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Last time, we saw Cortes make a daring escape from Cholula, leaving behind a scene of absolute devastation. Today, we're heading into Chapter 18, where the Spaniards are about to meet one of the most formidable and crucial players in this entire saga, the fiercely independent nation of This encounter will start with blood and fire but end in an alliance that will change the course of Mesoamerican history forever. So, after the Cholula massacre, Cortes and his army continued their march toward the Aztec capital, but between them and their goal lay the territory of the Tlaxcalans. Now, who were these people? The Tlaxcalans were a proud and powerful confederacy of 4 city-states, and they were, to put it mildly, the arch-enemies of the Aztecs. For generations, they had been surrounded by the expanding Aztec Empire, but they had never been conquered. They were a thorn in the side of Tenochtitlan, constantly resisting Aztec domination. The Aztecs even waged ceremonial wars, known as flower wars, against them, specifically to capture Tlaxcalan warriors for human sacrifice. So, the hatred between these two powers ran incredibly deep. Cortes, being the shrewd strategist he was, knew this. He had heard stories about the Tlaxcalans' animosity towards the Aztecs and hoped he could use it to his advantage. He sent envoys ahead, proposing a peaceful passage through their lands and offering an alliance against their common enemy, the Mexians. He probably thought, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Well, it wasn't that simple. The Tlaxcalan leadership was deeply divided. On one side, some leaders, like the elder Xicotencatl, argued for an alliance. They saw the Spaniards, with their strange weapons and horses, as a potential godsend, a powerful force that could finally help them break the Aztecs. They were tired of the constant warfare, the economic blockades, and the capture of their people for sacrifice. But on the other side was a much more skeptical and aggressive faction, led by Xicotencatl the Younger, the son of the elder leader, and the supreme commander of the Tlaxcalan armies. He was a brilliant and fiery military leader, and he didn't trust the newcomers one bit. To him, the Spaniards were just another group of invaders. Their destruction of Cholula, a traditional rival but also a major religious center, didn't exactly paint them as friendly liberators. He argued, how do we know they aren't just allies of Montezuma in disguise? Or worse, a new threat that will try to dominate us, just like the Aztecs have. He suspected a trap and convinced the Tlaxcalan Council to test the Spaniards' strength in battle first. If the Spaniards won, then maybe they were worthy allies. If they lost, they were just another problem solved. So, as Cortes and his men entered Tlaxcalan territory, they weren't met with open arms. They were met with thousands of warriors. The initial skirmishes were fierce. The Tlaxcalans were seasoned fighters, known for their skill and bravery. They used obsidian-bladed wooden swords, called macuihidal, which could supposedly decapitate a horse in a single blow. The Spanish soldiers, despite their steel armor and cannons, were shocked by the sheer scale and ferocity of the attacks. The first major battle was a brutal affair. The Spaniards and their Totonac allies found themselves surrounded by a massive Tlaxcalan army. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortes' soldiers who wrote a famous account of the conquest, described the scene as terrifying. The air was filled with the deafening sounds of war drums, trumpets, and the war cries of thousands of warriors. Arrows and javelins rained down on them like hail. The Spaniards formed a tight defensive square, using their cannons, crossbows, and harquebusas to inflict heavy casualties, but the Tlaxcalans just kept coming, wave after wave. The Spanish cavalry was their key advantage. The Tlaxcalans had never seen horses before and were initially terrified of these man-beasts. The speed and power of a cavalry charge could break through their infantry lines, causing chaos and panic. But the Tlaxcalans adapted quickly. Xicotencatl the Younger devised strategies to counter the horses, using long pikes and trying to trap them in rough terrain. In one engagement, they actually managed to kill a horse, which was a huge psychological blow to the Spaniards and a morale boost for the Tlaxcala. They cut up the horse's body and sent pieces of it to different Tlaxcalan towns to prove that these creatures were mortal, not gods. For several days, the fighting was relentless. The Spaniards were exhausted, outnumbered, and running low on supplies. Many were wounded, and some were killed. At night, they would huddle in their camp, tending to their injuries, while listening to the intimidating sounds of the Tlaxcalan army surrounding them. For a moment, it seemed like the expedition might end right there, in the highlands of Tlaxcala. Cortes himself later admitted that he had never been in such grave danger. But despite their incredible bravery, the Tlaxcalans couldn't break the Spanish formation. Spanish steel armor provided superior protection against Mesoamerican weapons, and their cannons and firearms caused devastating losses. Every Tlaxcalan charge was met with a wall of steel and a volley of gunfire. The casualty ratio was incredibly lopsided. For every Spaniard that fell, hundreds of Tlaxcalans were killed. After several major battles and continuous skirmishes, the Tlaxcalan Council began to reconsider their position. The cost of fighting the Spaniards was proving to be astronomically high. Their best warriors were being slaughtered. Xicotencatl the Younger was still determined to fight on, but the faction arguing for peace was gaining ground. They pointed out that if the Spaniards could withstand the full might of the Tlaxcalan army, then perhaps they really were the allies they had been hoping for. Maybe, just maybe, these strange foreigners were the key to finally defeating the hated Aztecs. The debate raged in the Tlaxcalan Senate, but eventually, the peace faction won. The immense casualties, combined with Cortes' relentless offers of peace and alliance, finally tipped the scales. They sent envoys to the Spanish camp, signaling their desire to end the hostilities. Xicotencatl the Younger was furious, and was even accused of plotting to ambush the Spaniards during the peace talks, but he was overruled by the elder statesman. And so, the fighting stopped. The very warriors who had been trying to kill the Spaniards just days before now welcomed them into their capital city. Tlaxcala. Cortes and his men marched into the city not as conquerors, but as guests and future allies. It was a surreal turnaround. They were given food, lodging, and gifts. The Tlaxcalan lords formally pledged their allegiance to Cortes and the Spanish crown. This alliance was, without a doubt, the single most important turning point in the entire conquest. Cortes didn't just gain passage to Tenochtitlan, he gained an army. The Tlaxcalans provided the Spaniards with tens of thousands of elite warriors, porters to carry supplies, and a secure base of operations deep within enemy territory. They knew the land, they knew the Aztec military tactics, and they were fueled by a generations-old desire for revenge. Without the Tlaxcalans, it's almost certain that Cortes' expedition would have failed. His small force would have eventually been overwhelmed, but with the might of Tlaxcala at his back, he was no longer the leader of a few hundred adventurers. He was the commander of a massive, multi-ethnic army, poised to strike at the heart of the Aztec Empire. The stage was now set for the final, dramatic confrontation with Montezuma and the march on Tenochtitlan. The decision made in the halls of the Tlaxcalan government would seal the fate of the Aztec world. Thanks for watching. This alliance is so crucial, and we'll see exactly how it plays out in the upcoming battles. If you're enjoying this deep dive into history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. See you next time. Hello, and welcome back to our historical deep dive series. Today, we're re-exploring a question that seems simple on the surface but has layers of complexity. Why did the Aztec Empire fall? Most people point to the Spanish conquistadors, their advanced weaponry, and the diseases they brought. And while that's a huge part of the story, it's not the whole story. To truly understand the fall of the Aztecs, we have to rewind the clock, not just to the arrival of Hernan Cortes in 1519, but centuries earlier. The seeds of the empire's destruction were sown long before any European set foot in the Americas. This is Chapter 19. Old Wars, New Consequences. The story of the Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance as it was formerly known, begins with the Mexica people. They were latecomers to the Valley of Mexico, arriving in the 13th century as a nomadic, somewhat marginalized group. The valley was already a crowded and competitive place, dominated by powerful city-states like Azcapotzalco and Culhuecan. The early Mexica served as mercenaries, fighting for these larger powers, learning the art of war and the brutal politics of the region. This period was crucial. It taught them that in this world, you were either the hammer or the anvil. They chose to be the hammer. In 1428, everything changed. The Mexica, in alliance with the city-states of Texcoco and Tlacopan, overthrew the dominant Teponic Empire of Azcapotzalco. This was the birth of the Aztec Triple Alliance. But this alliance wasn't a union of equals. The Mexica, based in their incredible island city of Tenochtitlan, quickly became the senior partner. Their ambition was boundless. Over the next 90 years, they launched a series of relentless military campaigns, expanding their influence from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific Ocean. But here, as the critical detail, the Aztec Empire wasn't an empire in the Roman or British sense. They didn't typically install their own governors or assimilate conquered peoples into a unified culture. Instead, their system was primarily based on tribute. When they conquered a city-state, they would demand regular payments of goods, food, textiles, precious metals, jade, exotic feathers, and most notoriously, captives for human sacrifice. As long as the tribute flowed, the local rulers were often left in place to govern their own people. This system was incredibly efficient for extracting wealth, but it created a landscape of deep-seated resentment. Imagine you're a leader of a conquered town. You've lost your sons in a war against the Aztecs. Now, every few months, their collectors arrive to take a significant portion of your harvest, your finest crafts, and sometimes your people. You're not a happy subject. You're a resentful vassal, waiting for any opportunity, any sign of weakness, to reclaim your independence. The empire was less a unified state and more a collection of resentful tribute payers held together by fear. The Aztec military was the glue, and their reputation for ruthless punishment kept most in line. But underneath the surface, the pressure was building. One of the most famous examples of this simmering hatred comes from the city-state of the Tlaxcalans were a thorn in the side of the Aztec Empire. They were never fully conquered. Instead, the Aztecs surrounded them, engaging in a perpetual state of low-intensity conflict, known as the Flower Wars. The official Aztec justification for these wars was that they were a ritualistic way to train warriors and capture victims for sacrifice without engaging in a full-scale war of conquest. However, for the Tlaxcalans, it was a constant, bloody struggle for survival. They were blockaded, unable to access key resources like salt and cotton. For generations, their primary relationship with the Aztecs was one of bloodshed. They hated the Mexica with a passion that is hard to overstate. This wasn't just political rivalry, it was a visceral, multi-generational feud. And it wasn't just Tlaxcala. The Totonacs on the Gulf Coast were among the first people Cortes encountered. They were a recently conquered group, chafing under Aztec rule. When Cortes and his small band of Spaniards arrived, the Totonacs didn't see strange invaders to be feared. They saw potential liberators. They saw a crack in the armor of the seemingly invincible Aztec war machine. They complained bitterly to Cortes about the tribute demands and the constant threat of being taken for sacrifice. They saw an opportunity, and they took it, offering the Spanish food, shelter, and thousands of their own warriors to march on Tenochtitlan. This is the crucial context we need. When Hernán Cortés landed in 1519 with around 500 soldiers, he wasn't invading a unified, loyal empire. He was stepping into a political powder keg that had been filling for nearly a century. He was a match, but the fuel was already there. Cortés was a shrewd and ruthless politician. He quickly understood the political landscape. He realized that many of the people he met didn't see themselves as Aztec. They saw themselves as Totonac, or Tlaxcalan, or Huexotzincan, and they saw the Mexica of Tenochtitlan as their oppressors. The Spanish alliance with Tlaxcala was the single most important factor in their eventual success. When the Spanish were initially driven from Tenochtitlan, in a disastrous retreat known as La Noche Triste, or the Night of Sorrows, they didn't flee back to the coast. They retreated to the safety of any other city-state might have finished them off, and delivered their heads to the Aztec Emperor Montezuma to get back in his good graces. But not the Tlaxcala. They nursed the wounded Spaniards, but to health they fate them. And then, They committed tens of thousands of their own elite warriors to the final siege of Tenochtitlan. The final siege of the Aztec capital was not a story of 500 Spaniards against an empire of millions. It was a massive civil war, a pan-Mesoamerican uprising against Aztec dominance, with the Spanish acting as a catalyst and providing a technological and tactical edge. The army that surrounded Tenochtitlan was composed of thousands upon thousands of indigenous warriors from Tlaxcala, Texcoco, which had its own internal power struggles, and other disgruntled cities. They were the ones who knew the terrain, who provided the bulk of the fighting force, and who sustained the logistical effort of the months-long siege. They were driven by a century of anger and a desire for revenge. The Aztec system of rule, built on intimidation and tribute rather than integration and loyalty, was ultimately its greatest weakness. The empire's constant wars created not subjects, but enemies. These enemies were just waiting for a chance to break their chains. The Spanish, with their steel swords, horses, and cannons, provided that chance. They represented an outside force that could disrupt the existing balance of power. The decision by groups like the Tlaxcalans and Totonacs to ally with courts was a betrayal of their own people. It was a strategic choice in a long and bloody struggle against their primary enemy, the Mexica of Tenochtitlan. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not just a foreign conquest. It was the explosive climax of generations of internal conflict. A revolution ignited by the arrival of a few hundred determined outsiders. The old wars of the Aztecs created the perfect conditions for their new conquerors. Thank you for watching. It's a complex and often tragic story, but understanding these deep-rooted conflicts gives us a much more accurate picture of how one of the most powerful empires in the Americas came to an end. If you found this interesting, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more historical deep dives. We'll see you in the next chapter. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on Aztec history. Today, we're diving into the dramatic and tragic conclusion of a centuries-old tradition, the Flower Wars. For generations, these ritualized battles were a cornerstone of Aztec society, a way to train warriors, capture sacrifices for the gods, and maintain a delicate political balance. But with the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century, this ancient practice came to an abrupt and violent end. So, how did one of the most defining aspects of Aztec culture simply vanish? Let's explore the perfect storm of conquest, disease, and colonial overhaul that sealed the fate of the Flower Wars. To understand the end, we first need to remember the beginning. The Flower Wars, or Ixayoyotl in Nahuatl, weren't about conquering territory or destroying an enemy. They were prearranged conflicts between the Aztec Triple Alliance and their rivals, like the city-states of Tlaxcala, Huaxotzinco, and Sulu. The goals were specific: capture high-status warriors for ritual sacrifice, and provide a live-fire training ground for elite soldiers like the Eagle and Jaguar warriors. It was a system built on a shared cosmovision, where blood sustained the gods and kept the universe in motion. The combatants understood the rules. It was a sacred, albeit brutal institution woven into the fabric of their world. But the arrival of Hernan Cortes and his conquistadors in 1519 introduced a type of warfare the Aztecs had never encountered. The Spanish didn't fight for captives. They fought for total domination and annihilation. Their concept of war was absolute. They aimed to kill their enemies on the battlefield, shatter their political structures, and seize their lands and resources. This was a direct clash of ideologies. The Aztecs initially tried to engage the Spanish within their traditional framework, hoping to capture these strange, powerful newcomers for their gods. But this approach was disastrously ineffective. The Spanish brought steel swords, crossbows, cannons, and cavalry technologies that rendered Aztec tactics obsolete. A warrior trying to capture a Spaniard with a macuahuitl, a wooden club edged with obsidian blades, was at a fatal disadvantage against a soldier in full plate armor aiming to kill. The Battle of Otumba is a stark example of this clash. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Spanish forces, fighting with a desperate ferocity, managed to break the Aztec lines and kill their commander. This was total war, a concept alien to the ritualized combat of the Flower Wars. The Spanish weren't interested in a symbolic display of power. They were fighting for survival and conquest. They formed a crucial alliance with the Tlaxcalans, the Aztecs' traditional enemies and frequent opponents in the Flower Wars. For the Tlaxcalans, this was an opportunity to finally break the cycle of Aztec dominance. They eagerly joined courts, bringing their own military knowledge and manpower to the fight. But this time the goal wasn't just to capture a few nobles. The goal was the complete destruction of the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan. The very foundation of the Flower Wars, a political stalemate between rival powers, was shattered by this new alliance. The Spanish and their indigenous allies weren't playing by the old rules anymore. They were writing new ones with steel and gunpowder. But perhaps the most devastating weapon the Spanish brought wasn't a sword or a cannon. It was something they couldn't even see. Disease. Smallpox swept through Mesoamerica like a wildfire, arriving just before the final siege of Tenochtitlan. The indigenous populations had no immunity to old world diseases. Smallpox, measles, and influenza decimated them on a scale that is almost unimaginable today. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the native population perished in the decades following the conquest. This demographic collapse was catastrophic. It wiped out entire communities, including the very warrior class that participated in the Flower Wars. There simply weren't enough healthy, trained men left to continue the tradition. The social structure that supported the warrior elites crumbled. How could you organize a ritual battle when your city was filled with the sick and dying? The new reality was a desperate struggle for survival against an invisible enemy. The gods, who were supposed to be nourished by the sacrifices from the Flower Wars, seemed silent. This biological catastrophe fundamentally undermined the Aztec cosmovision. The sacrifices hadn't protected them. The rituals had failed. This created a profound crisis of faith, shaking the very beliefs that justified the Flower Wars in the first place. With Tenochtitlan in ruins by 1521 and the Aztec Empire defeated, the final phase began. Colonial transformation. The Spanish crown and the Catholic Church systematically dismantled every aspect of pre-Hispanic life. Their goal was to replace the old ways with Spanish political, economic, and religious systems. The warrior ethos that was central to Aztec identity was actively suppressed. The training houses for young warriors, the Comicac and Tlaxcala, were closed. The warrior orders of the Eagles and Jaguars were disbanded. Public displays of indigenous military prowess were forbidden. The Spanish saw these traditions as a direct threat to their control and as pagan practices that needed to be eradicated. In place of the warrior, the Spanish promoted a new social order based on labor and conversion. Indigenous men were forced into encomienda systems, a form of tribute labor, working in mines or on Spanish-owned farms. Their energy was redirected from the battlefield to the economy of New Spain. The focus shifted from gaining honor through combat to simply surviving under a new colonial regime. Simultaneously, Franciscan and Dominican friars embarked on a massive campaign of religious conversion. They destroyed temples, burned sacred texts, and preached against the demonic practice of human sacrifice. Since sacrifice was the primary objective of the Flower Wars, its prohibition by the church cut out the very heart of the ritual. Aztec nobles who survived the conquest were often incorporated into the lower rungs of the colonial administration, but their power was a shadow of what it once was. They adopted Spanish dress, language, and religion to maintain some semblance of status. The old rivalries that fueled the Flower Wars became irrelevant in this new colonial context. City-states like Tlaxcala, who had helped the Spanish, were given certain privileges, but they too were ultimately subjects of the Spanish crown. The entire political landscape that had sustained ritual warfare for centuries was gone, replaced by a single, overarching colonial power. So, the end of the Flower Wars wasn't a single event. It was a rapid and brutal unraveling caused by three interconnected forces. First, the Spanish introduced a new, total form of warfare that made ritual combat impossible. Second, European diseases caused a demographic collapse that wiped out the population needed to sustain the tradition and shattered the Aztecs' worldview. And finally, the Spanish colonial project actively dismantled the military, political, and religious institutions that gave the Flower Wars their purpose. The ritual battles, once a vibrant and central part of Mesoamerican life, simply could not survive in the world of New Spain. They became a relic of a lost era, a memory of a time when the rules of war and indeed the entire universe, were fundamentally different. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into the end of the Flower Wars. It's a powerful reminder of how quickly and completely a culture can be transformed by conquest. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more chapters in our journey through history. Let me know in the comments what you think. See you next time. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating and often misunderstood part of Aztec history, the Flower Wars. Now, you've probably heard of them, and if you have, the image that comes to mind is likely one of brutal, pointless skirmishes fought just to capture people for sacrifice. It's a powerful, grim image. But what if I told you that it's largely a myth, a misunderstanding that has been passed down for centuries? In today's video, we're going to unravel how the true purpose of the Flower Wars was lost to history, and how structured ritual conflict became twisted into a story of meaningless violence. So, let's set the stage. The Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance, was the dominant power in central Mexico before the Spanish arrival. Their society was complex, deeply religious, and yes, it involved human sacrifice on a scale that's hard for us to comprehend. This is where the story usually begins. Spanish chroniclers, arriving in the 16th century, were horrified by what they saw. They wrote accounts that depicted the Aztecs as bloodthirsty savages, and the Flower Wars became a prime example of this supposed barbarism. According to their version of events, the Aztec gods had an insatiable hunger for human hearts, and these wars were a convenient way to keep the sacrificial altars supplied without the hassle of a full-scale conquest. This narrative is incredibly compelling, and it stuck. For hundreds of years, historians and the public alike accepted this version. The Flower Wars were just that, wars for flowers, with the flowers being the hearts of captured warriors. It painted a picture of a society obsessed with death, engaged in endless, senseless conflict just to appease their dark gods. It's a simple, dramatic story. The problem is, it's not the full story. In fact, it misses the entire point. To understand the real Flower Wars, we have to strip away centuries of bias and look at them from an Aztec perspective. These were not wars in the way we understand them. They were prearranged, highly ritualized contests between specific cities. Think of them less like a modern battlefield and more like a sacred, high-stakes sporting event. The goal wasn't to conquer territory, destroy an enemy army, or loot a city. The goal was to engage in ritual combat. So, what was the purpose? The primary reason was likely religious and cosmological. The Aztecs believed the world was in a constant, precarious balance. The sun god Huitzilopochtli needed nourishment in the form of precious human life energy to continue his daily battle against darkness and keep the cosmos from collapsing. From this perspective, sacrifice wasn't murder. It was a necessary duty to sustain the universe. Capturing a warrior in a flower war and offering them for sacrifice was seen as the highest honor one could achieve. It was a sacred death that ensured the continuation of life for everyone. The captive wasn't a victim in our sense. They were a participant in a cosmic ritual. Ibentename Flower War, or Exayoyatl, in Nahuatl, gives us a clue. Flowers were symbols of beauty, preciousness, and the divine. This wasn't a flowery war. It was a precious or sacred war. Another key purpose was military training. The Aztec army was the backbone of the empire, and it needed to be sharp, disciplined, and battle-hardened. The Flower Wars provided a perfect training ground. It was a controlled environment where young warriors could gain real combat experience against worthy opponents without the risks and costs of a full-scale campaign. They could test their skills, prove their valor, and rise through the social ranks based on the number of captives they took. It was a way to maintain a standing army at peak readiness. And there was a political dimension too. The Flower Wars were a form of political theater. By engaging in these ritual battles, the Aztec Triple Alliance could display its military superiority over its rivals, without having to crush them completely. It was a constant reminder of who was in charge. It allowed subject states or rivals like Tlaxcala to maintain a degree of autonomy, while still acknowledging the dominance of the Aztec core. It was a complex political dance, a way of managing power and status within the intricate web of Mesoamerican city-states. So, if the Flower Wars were this complex ritual, why did the Spanish and later historians get it so wrong? First, we have the culture clash. The Spanish conquistadors came from a world with a completely different understanding of warfare, religion, and sacrifice. They saw the practice through the lens of their own Catholic faith, where human sacrifice was an abomination. They couldn't or wouldn't understand the Aztec cosmological worldview. For them, it was simply devil worship, and the Flower Wars were proof. Their accounts were written to justify their conquest, painting the Aztecs as tyrants who needed to be saved from their own brutal religion. Second, the evidence itself is tricky. Most of our information comes from sources written after the conquest, either by the Spanish or by indigenous people who had converted to Christianity. These native informants were often trying to explain their old ways to their new Spanish rulers, and they may have simplified or altered their descriptions to be more understandable or less offensive to a European audience. They might have emphasized the sacrificial aspect because it was the most dramatic and the one their interviewers were most interested in. The nuances of ritual, training, and political maneuvering were easily lost in translation. Over time, this simplified, sensationalized version became entrenched. The image of the Aztecs as blood-crazed killers was useful for colonial narratives and, later, for popular entertainment. It has a much more dramatic story than one about ritualized combat for cosmic balance and military training. The myth of meaningless violence took hold because it was simple, shocking, and served a purpose for the people telling the story. It wasn't until the 20th century that archaeologists and historians really started to question this old narrative. By re-examining the original codices, analyzing archaeological evidence, and applying a more culturally sensitive lens, a new picture began to emerge. Scholars started to piece together the true nature of the Flower Wars as a multi-layered institution that served religious, military, and political functions simultaneously. They realized that to dismiss them as meaningless violence was to misunderstand the very core of Aztec society. This re-evaluation teaches us a critical lesson about history. History is not just a collection of facts. It's an interpretation of those facts. The stories we tell about the past are shaped by our own biases, our own culture, and our own agendas. The tale of the Flower Wars is a powerful example of how a complex cultural practice can be flattened and distorted, becoming a myth that obscures more than it reveals. The reality was far more structured, far more symbolic, and far more meaningful to the people who participated in it than the myth of senseless brutality would have us believe. By peeling back the layers of memory and myth, we don't just get a more accurate picture of the Aztecs. We gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of their world. They weren't just one-dimensional villains from a horror story. They were people with a sophisticated and coherent, albeit very different, way of understanding the universe and their place within it. The Flower Wars were not a sign of their barbarism, but a testament to the intricate and powerful logic of their civilization. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this gave you a new perspective on the Aztecs and the famous Flower Wars. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's biggest misunderstandings. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video. Have you ever wondered what happens when two giants clash? For centuries, Mesoamerica was dominated by the mighty Aztec Empire, a civilization of incredible power, artistry, and military might. But just beyond their borders, in the highlands, lived a people who refused to bow. Their rivalry wasn't just a series of skirmishes. It was a century-long epic of resistance, strategy, and unyielding pride. This is the story of the Aztec Tlaxcalan Wars, a conflict that didn't just define an era but fundamentally reshaped the destiny of an entire continent. The legacy of their struggle is a complex tale of alliance, betrayal, and survival, and it holds the key to understanding one of history's most dramatic turning points. The fall of the Aztec Empire. To understand this epic rivalry, we first need to appreciate the world they lived in. By the 15th century, the Aztec Triple Alliance, led by the city of Tenochtitlan, had become the undisputed superpower of Mesoamerica. Through a combination of fierce warfare and shrewd diplomacy, they built a vast tribute empire, stretching from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific Ocean. Conquered city-states were required to send a steady stream of goods from maize and cotton, to exotic feathers, and precious jade too. The Aztecs weren't just conquerors. They were master engineers and administrators, building a magnificent city on a lake, crisscrossed by canals and connected by causeways. Their society was deeply religious. organized around a complex pantheon of gods who required constant appeasement, often through ritual sacrifice. This worldview fueled their military expansion, as capturing warriors for these rituals was a primary objective of their campaigns. The Aztec war machine was a sight to behold, with elite jaguar and eagle warriors leading disciplined armies into battle, their obsidian-bladed Makuahuitl capable of fearsome destruction. They were, in short, the apex predator of their world, but not everyone was under their thumb. Nestled in the eastern highlands of modern-day Mexico was the Confederacy of Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala wasn't a single city, but a union of 4 powerful cities, bound together by a shared culture, language, and, most importantly, a fierce desire for independence. Unlike the monarchical system of the Aztecs, Tlaxcala was governed by a council of lords, a sort of aristocratic republic. This political structure fostered a deep-seated sense of collective identity and resilience. They were surrounded on all sides by Aztec-controlled territory, effectively living under a perpetual economic blockade. The Aztecs denied them access to crucial resources like cotton and salt, hoping to slowly choke them into submission. But this pressure didn't break the Tlaxcalans. Eat forkhead tem. They became hardened warriors, masters of defensive warfare, and their hatred for the Aztec Empire that sought to suffocate them grew with each passing generation. This brings us to the most unique aspect of their conflict: the Flower Wars. These weren't wars for conquest or territory in the traditional sense. The Ixayoyato or Flower Wars were ritualized, pre-arranged battles fought between Aztec and Tlaxcalan warriors. On the surface, the purpose was to capture warriors for religious sacrifice and to provide live combat training for their best soldiers. Imagine 2 heavyweight boxers agreeing to a series of brutal sparring matches, not for a title, but to stay sharp and prove their mettle. For the Aztecs, it was a way to display their martial superiority and keep their elite warriors battle-ready. But for the Tlaxcalans, it was something more. It was a constant, draining struggle for survival. While the Aztecs could draw from a massive population to replenish their ranks, every warrior lost was a devastating blow to the much smaller Tlaxcalan state. Yet, they fought on. These wars, year after year, decade after decade, honed Tlaxcalan military tactics and instilled in them an intimate knowledge of Aztec fighting styles. They learned how to counter the Aztec charge, how to use the terrain to their advantage, and, most critically, they nurtured a deep, unquenchable animosity towards their imperial neighbor. The Flower Wars were a crucible that created the perfect anti-Aztec weapon, and that weapon was about to be put to the ultimate test. In 1519, everything changed. Strange, floating mountains appeared off the coast, carting pale-skinned men with thunderous weapons and creatures they rode like deer. Hernan Cortes and his small band of Spanish conquistadors had arrived. When news of these newcomers reached the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II, he was cautious, unsure if they were men or gods. But as the Spaniards made their way inland, their intentions became clearer. They sought gold, glory, and to claim this new world for their king and their god. As Cortes marched towards the heart of the empire, Tenochtitlan, he had to pass through Tlaxcalan territory. What happened next was not an immediate alliance. True to their nature, the Tlaxcalans fiercely resisted the Spanish in a series of brutal battles. They had never bowed to any foreign power, and these strange invaders would be no exception. The Spanish were shocked by the Tlaxcalans' ferocity and discipline. Their steel swords and crossbows were met with a storm of obsidian-tipped arrows and relentless charges. For a moment, the Spanish expedition hung by a thread, but Cortes was a master of diplomacy and recognizing opportunity. After withstanding the Tlaxcalan onslaught, he offered peace, and the Tlaxcalan Council, led by the shrewd elder Xicotencatl. The elder faced a momentous decision. They saw in the Spanish something they had never seen before, a potential counterweight to Aztec power. Here was a force that possessed technology and tactics the Aztecs couldn't match. An alliance with these newcomers was a monumental gamble, but it offered the one thing they craved above all else: the chance to finally break the Aztec stranglehold and destroy their ancient enemy. The Tlaxcalans made their choice. They would join the Spanish. This decision is one of the most significant turning points in American history. It wasn't simply a case of the Spanish conquering the Aztecs. It was a Mesoamerican civil war, with the Spanish acting as a powerful, disruptive catalyst, the Tlaxcalans didn't become mere followers. They became indispensable partners. They provided the Spanish with thousands upon thousands of elite warriors of the backbone of the invasion force. They provided food, shelter, and crucial intelligence about Aztec defenses and political weaknesses. When the Spanish were driven from Tenochtitlan during the catastrophic Noche Triste, it was in Tlaxcala that they found refuge, regrouped, and planned their final assault. The siege of Tenochtitlan was a monumental undertaking, a brutal, street-by-street battle for the soul of the empire. And at every step, the Tlaxcalan warriors were there, fighting alongside the Spanish. They built the boats that would control the lake. They fought on the causeways, and their knowledge of the city and its defenders was invaluable. When Tenochtitlan finally fell in August 1521, it was as much a Tlaxcalan victory as it was a Spanish one. They had achieved their century-long goal. The Aztec Empire was shattered. But what was the legacy of this victory? In the immediate aftermath, the Tlaxcalans were rewarded for their loyalty. The Spanish crown granted them special privileges. They were largely exempt from the tribute and forced labor systems imposed on other indigenous groups. Their city-state retained a significant degree of autonomy, and Tlaxcalan nobles were recognized as aristocracy within the new colonial structure of New Spain. They became colonists themselves, joining Spanish expeditions to pacify and settle other parts of Mesoamerica, from northern Mexico all the way to the Philippines. They had survived, and for a time, they prospered in a way their rivals did not. However, the long-term legacy is far more complex and tinged with tragedy. While the Tlaxcalans secured a privileged position, they couldn't escape the devastating impact of the new world they helped create. European diseases, like smallpox, swept through Mesoamerica, decimating populations indiscriminately. Tlaxcalans included. Over time, their special privileges eroded as the Spanish colonial administration consolidated its power. In the grand narrative of Mexican history, their role became controversial. For centuries, they were branded as traitors, the people who sided with the foreign invaders to bring down their own kind. This is a simplistic and unfair judgment. It ignores the reality of their world. The Tlaxcalans didn't see themselves as Mexicans or Mesoamericans in a unified sense. They saw themselves as Tlaxcalans, a distinct people fighting for their very existence against a brutal and oppressive empire. Their alliance with courts was a strategic choice born of 100 years of warfare and desperation. It was a choice for survival. Today, the legacy of the Aztec Tlaxcalan Wars is being re-examined. Historians now recognize the vital agency of the Tlaxcalans and other indigenous groups in the Spanish conquest. It wasn't a simple story of European domination, but a complex web of pre-existing rivalries, alliances, and indigenous ambitions that the Spanish cleverly exploited. The story of Tlaxcala is a powerful reminder that history is rarely a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a story of people making difficult choices in extraordinary circumstances. The clash between the Aztecs and Tlaxcalans shaped the identity of a region, determined the fate of an empire, and laid the groundwork for the world we see today. Their legacy is not one of treason, but one of resilience, strategy, and the enduring, complex quest for a people to control their own destiny. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. What do you think? Were the Tlaxcalan strategists or traitors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, we stand at the edge of history, in a place where the clamor of conflict has long since faded into a profound silence. This is chapter 23, a silent battlefield at dusk. Imagine, if you will, the sun dipping below the horizon, its last golden rays painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The light stretches across a vast, empty field, a place that once thundered with the sounds of charging horses, clashing swords, and the desperate cries of men. Now, there is only the gentle whisper of the wind sweeping through the tall grass. This is not just empty land. It's a canvas of memory, where every blade of grass seems to hold a story, every mound of earth a testament to the struggles that unfolded here. The air is thick with a sense of peace, but it's a heavy peace, one earned through turmoil. You can almost feel the echoes of the past, not as loud shouts, but as a faint, resonant hum deep within the earth itself. As twilight deepens, the world becomes a study in shadows and silhouettes. We walk this ground not as conquerors or as mourners, but as quiet observers. Look over there, at that gnarled, ancient tree standing alone against the skyline. How many seasons has it witnessed? How many dawns and dusks has it seen since the last battle cry faded? Its branches, twisted and reaching, are like the arms of an old storyteller, gesturing towards the past, inviting us to listen to the silence. It's a silence that speaks volumes, telling tales of courage, of loss, of the immense human cost of conflict. In this quiet moment, the grandeur of victory and the agony of defeat seem to blur, leaving only a shared sense of humanity. Let's shift our gaze from the open field to a nearby structure, a quiet temple half hidden by creeping vines and the patient growth of nature. Its stone walls are weathered, softened by centuries of wind and rain. This temple was likely here long before the battles, and it has remained long after. It stands as a symbol of endurance, a beacon of tranquility in a landscape once defined by chaos. As we approach its gates, the scent of damp earth and old incense fills the air. The carved figures on its facade have been worn smooth by time, their expressions serene, almost indifferent to the human dramas that played out at their feet. They have seen empires rise and fall, heard the prayers of soldiers and the laments of widows, and through it all, they have maintained their silent vigil. Stepping inside, we find ourselves in a space that feels suspended in time. Dust motes dance in the final shafts of twilight filtering through a high window. The air is cool and still. Here, the echoes of war are replaced by a different kind of echo, the memory of chanted prayers, the soft shuffle of monastic robes, the gentle ring of a meditation bell. This temple was a sanctuary, a place where people sought solace and meaning amidst the madness. It represents the persistent human search for peace, for something greater than the conflicts of the moment. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a space for reflection, for hope, and for the quiet mending of the soul. Imagine the monks who once tended these halls. They would have heard the distant drums of war, a constant, threatening rhythm on the horizon. Perhaps they lit extra candles, their prayers a silent counterpoint to the violence outside. The drums were the heartbeat of the battlefield, a relentless percussion that dictated the pulse of life and death. For the soldiers, that sound meant adrenaline, fear, and duty. For those in the temple, it was a somber reminder of the world's suffering. Now, those drums are gone. The only rhythm is the beating of our own hearts as we stand in this hallowed silence. The absence of that sound is more powerful than its presence ever was. It marks the transition from war to peace, from a moment in time to a lesson for history. The echoes of the drums are fading, not just from this place, but from our own immediate consciousness. As we stand here, they are receding into the annals of history, becoming part of a larger story. That is the nature of time. The most intense, all-consuming moments eventually soften, their sharp edges worn down until they become a part of the landscape. A chapter in a book. This battlefield, once a stage for a world-changing event, is now a quiet field. The temple, once a refuge from a storm, is now a monument to endurance. The drums, once a call to arms, are now a faint memory carried on the wind. This journey into the dusk is more than just a visit to an old site. It's a meditation on the cycles of history and the enduring power of peace. It teaches us that what feels permanent and overwhelming in the present will one day be a silent memory. The struggles of today will become the quiet battlefields of tomorrow, landscapes for future generations to walk through and reflect upon. What will they see? What will they feel? It's a humbling thought, isn't it? It puts our own lives, our own conflicts, into a much larger perspective. As the last sliver of light disappears and the stars begin to emerge in the inky sky, we are left with this profound sense of calm. The battlefield is at rest. The temple is at peace. The echoes of the past have finally dissolved into the quiet of the night. History is not just a collection of dates and events. It's a living presence, a silent teacher. And its greatest lessons are often found not in the noise of the battle, but in the stillness that follows. It is in this stillness that we can truly understand the value of peace and the importance of remembering. The stories are all here, waiting for anyone willing to listen to the silence. Thank you for joining me on this reflective journey through the twilight. It's in these quiet places that we can connect most deeply with our shared past and, perhaps, find a little more wisdom for our future. If this journey resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the silent corners of history. Until next time, take care and listen to the quiet. As our journey through this chapter comes to a gentle close, let's gather the threads of our exploration, weaving them into a soft blanket of thought, perfect for drifting into a peaceful sleep. Tonight, we've walked through the quiet gardens of ritual, the resolute mountains of resistance, the deep oceans of belief, and the ever-flowing river of time. Let's begin with ritual. Think of it not as a rigid chain, but as a comforting rhythm, like the steady beat of a heart or the gentle rise and fall of your own breath. Rituals are the quiet anchors in our day, the simple act of making a cup of tea in the morning, the way you arrange your pillows before bed, the weekly call to a loved one. These are the small, sacred ceremonies that give our lives shape and meaning. They are expressions of care for ourselves and for others. They are whispers to the universe that say, I am here, and this moment matters. As you settle into your bed tonight, notice the little rituals you perform, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of the lights, the final check of your alarm. Feel the comfort in this repetition, this gentle pattern that signals to your body and mind that it is time to rest, time to let go. These rituals are your personal lullabies, humming you softly toward sleep. From the quiet comfort of ritual, we move to the steady strength of resistance. Resistance isn't always a loud battle. Often, it is a quiet, internal resolve. It's the strength to hold on to your values when the world pushes against them. It's the courage to choose kindness in the face of anger, to maintain hope when surrounded by despair, to simply get out of bed on a day that feels heavy. Resistance is the gentle but firm act of protecting your inner peace. It is saying no to things that drain your spirit so you can say yes to what nourishes it. As you lie here, think of a small act of resistance you performed today. Perhaps you chose not to engage in a negative conversation. Perhaps you took a moment for yourself when you felt overwhelmed. Acknowledge that quiet strength within you. It is a powerful force, a guardian of your well-being. This gentle resistance creates a safe space for your mind to rest, a sanctuary where you can be free from the pressures of the day. Let that feeling of inner strength be a shield, protecting your dreams tonight. Now, let's drift into the vast, starlit waters of belief. Belief is the invisible force that shapes our reality. It's what we hold to be true about ourselves, about others, and about the world. It's the foundation upon which we build our lives. Belief can be a grand faith in a higher power, but it is also the simple, profound belief in the goodness of people, the belief that the sun will rise tomorrow, the belief that you are capable of more than you know. It's the trust you place in the process of life, even when you cannot see the path ahead. Tonight, let your beliefs be a soft pillow for your head. Believe in your own resilience. Believe in your capacity for growth and healing. Believe that rest is not a luxury, but a necessity, a vital part of your journey. Let your final waking thoughts be ones of positive belief. Believe that as you sleep, your body is repairing, your mind is clearing, and your spirit is This quiet faith is a powerful balm, soothing your soul and preparing you for a deep, restorative rest. Finally, we arrive at the shore of time. Time is not a relentless taskmaster, but a gentle current carrying us forward. We often feel like we are racing against it. But what if we chose to flow with it instead? Think of time as a series of moments, each one a precious gift. The past is a collection of lessons and memories, a story that has shaped you. It's there to be learned from, not to be lived in. The future is a landscape of possibility, a promise of new beginnings. It's there to be hoped for, not to be worried about. And the present, this very moment, is where life truly happens. It is the only place we have. As you lie here, feel the sensation of this present moment, the softness of your blankets, the stillness of the room, the gentle rhythm of your breathing. You are right here, right now, and that is all that matters. Release the grip of yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's anxieties. Allow yourself to simply be. Time is not your enemy. It is the space in which you get to experience life. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine time slowing down, the seconds stretching out into long, peaceful moments. Give yourself this gift of time. The time to rest, the time to heal, the time to dream. So, as we bring these ideas together, resistance, belief, and time, see how they intertwine to create a tapestry of a life lived with intention and grace. Our rituals ground us. Our resistance protects us. Our beliefs guide us. And our acceptance of time frees us. They are not separate concepts, but different facets of the same diamond. The human experience. Let the day's events fade away now, like ripples on a calm lake, disappearing into the stillness. Let go of any lingering thoughts, any to-do lists, any conversations you're replaying in your mind. Imagine each thought as a leaf, floating gently down a stream, moving away from you, out of sight. Your only task now is to rest. Your body knows what to do. Your mind is ready for peace. Feel a wave of relaxation begin at the tips of your toes, slowly moving upward. Feel it soften your feet, your ankles, your calves. Let it travel up through your knees and thighs, releasing all tension. Feel your hips and lower back sink into the mattress, completely supported. Let the wave of calm wash over your stomach, your chest, allowing your breath to become even deeper. Well, feel your shoulders drop, your arms become heavy and relaxed. Let the relaxation move into your neck, your jaw, your cheeks, and your forehead, smoothing away any remaining tension. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are at peace. As you float on the edge of sleep, hold on to this feeling of gentle conclusion. The chapter of today is complete. You have navigated its challenges and savored its joys. And now, a new, unwritten chapter awaits you in your dreams. A world of possibility, of rest, and of renewal. May your sleep be deep and your dreams be sweet. Good night. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time,